He pushed up against the cable ties again. "I can't tell you anything." "I don't believe you." I pulled a slither of fire from the flame form nearest his hips and let it press down on his groin. He screamed, even though I hadn't yet started to burn. "Where are the scientists, Frederick?" "I don't know. For fuck's sake, you've got to believe me. You've got to stop him." Him being my fiery alter ego, I gathered. "Like you stopped Hunt from raping me?" His gaze snapped to mine. This time the panic was sharper. "I can't give you what I don't know." "So the claim that you and Ronaldo had the scientists was yet another boast?" Just as Jackson had believed. "Yes, for God's sake, yes. I honestly don't know where they are." "I really don't think honesty and you are all that familiar," I said. "But perhaps the loss of a small piece of your anatomy will encourage you to become so." I pressed the fiery hand deeper. My pulse began to beat heavily in my head, a warning that I was once again pushing my limits. I once again ignored it. "Tell me where the scientists are, Frederick." His jeans began to smoulder, the material peeling away from my fiery touch. The stench of burning hair soon stained the air, but I didn't press any further. Not yet. "I don't know. You have to believe me, I don't." His words tumbled out over one another, his gaze wide, desperate. Yet there was something in the deeper recesses of his eyes, something that spoke of cunning. He thought he could fool me. Thought I wouldn't carry through with my threat. I burned his cock. He screamed. It was a god-awful sound, but I had no intention of showing him any sort of compassion or mercy. He didn't deserve it, and not just because he'd left me to Hunt's tender mercies, but because of what he'd helped do to those witches, and undoubtedly to countless others. The virus might have made them Luke's to control, but it had been Frederick's magic that had helped make their capture possible. "Tell me," I said, lifting the flames from his flesh again. His cock was red and already beginning to blister. Part of me hoped he would lose function. Part of me hoped he would continue to stall, and I could finish what I started. "Or face life as a eunuch." He was panting and sweating now, his expression one of pain and desperation. "I haven't got that information. Please, you must believe me." This time I raised the hands of all my fiery creations. The beating in my head got stronger. I gripped the table to keep upright and said, my voice harsh, "I'm afraid I don't. You're Ronaldo's thrall, and he's trusted you for generations to hide his presence and keep his schemes running undetected beneath a veil of magic. You cannot do either without knowing location details." I pressed the raised hands down. As his entire body began to smoulder, he screamed, all right, just stop it, stop them." I drew the fire back into my body, but it didn't ease the ache in my head. Only food, green tea, and fire could do that now, and not necessarily in that order. "Tell me where the scientists are," I said yet again. "I don't fucking know. We never have." He shook his head as if trying to clear it. "That's part of the damn reason we sent you and the Fae into Brooklyn." "You think they're still there?" I asked, surprised. "Yes, they have to be. There's no other place in Melbourne they could be." "We didn't find them there." "You found a damn airlock, one that's more than likely protecting the labs. Where else could they be?" Where else, indeed? And if that was the case, what was the connection to the vinegar formula written in dust? Or was it, I thought, my heart racing a little bit faster, not a clue, but rather a code? The code to the airlock scanner, perhaps? Had we had the answer all along and just been overthinking it? "Luke kept cloaks in other locations," I said. "So why do you expect me to believe he wouldn't keep the scientists off-site, in an ultra-safe location?" "Because there was no place safer than Brooklyn. It was his castle and the home of most of his troops. So where will we find Ronaldo's castle? The sudden switch had him blinking. Then he swore at me and fought against his restraints again. The scent of blood began to taint the air, and though I doubted the aroma would tempt Adam, part of me couldn't help but hope for a sudden loss of control. "Even if I tell you, it won't do you any good," Frederick said. His pupils were becoming more dilated, his words more slurred. The hallucinogen had taken a firm hold of him now, but he obviously needed just a little more pushing, and maybe not the pain-filled kind. "Tell me," I said, even as I became flame and shaped my fire into a vague resemblance of Ronaldo. As Frederick's gaze widened, I shifted back, added, "Tell them," in a deeper tone, then took on Ronaldo's fiery figure again. Frederick's harsh rasping filled the air. For an instant, I didn't think he was going to fall for the ploy. But then he said, "Risley Street, Richmond. He has a warehouse there." I doused my flames again and said, "What number?" 14. Please stop them." I glanced past him. "Anything else we need to know?" Adam stepped forward and placed his hands on either side of Frederick's head. After a moment, Frederick closed his eyes, and his breathing deepened. He was asleep. "That's quite an impressive trick," I said. "Sam wasn't kidding when he said you'd be able to stop this bastard from communicating with his boss." "Stopping it wasn't without problems." He ran a hand through his pale hair, and it was only then that I noticed the pallor of his skin. "And Ronaldo will undoubtedly sense something has happened." Can he reach Frederick's thoughts even though he's now asleep? "Yes, but I've mangled his memories and removed any evidence of him being forced to give Ronaldo's location." He paused and glanced at the door. "Sam, we need to move if you want any hope of catching Ronaldo." The door opened and the three men entered. Sam's gaze met mine, and he gave me a brief nod. "Well done." I smiled and wondered if he actually meant well done on not killing the bastard. "Contact base," Sam continued. "We need a full-scale operation in place, stat." "Don't," I said hurriedly. "It's too much of a risk." "PIT does not have a mole," Sam said, his tone curt. "Ronaldo implied that he did," I snapped back. "And I don't want to risk losing the bastard just because you and your boss are pig-headedly determined not to even consider the possibility." Adam coughed and seemed to be struggling to keep his expression flat. Sam simply glared at me as the shadows stirred around him. If it was meant to intimidate, it wasn't successful. I'd all but flatlined when it came to any emotion but anger and determination right now. "I very much suspect the three of us will not be enough to take the—" "It's not 3, Jackson said, "but 5. If you think we're not going to be part of an operation to bring this bastard down, you've got rocks in your head." "Remember, too," I said, "that you can't stop me from leaving this room right now and heading over there by myself." The darkness that was the virus sharpened significantly, but after a glance at Adam, he waved a hand and said, "Fine. Come with us. But you follow orders, understood?" I nodded. "What about Frederick?" "He won't wake until I order him to," Adam said. "And even if Ronaldo overrides that order, Frederick can't escape because he's strapped down." "He'll be able to use magic once the drug wears off." "Undoubtedly," Adam said. "But I don't think he'll get the chance. Ronaldo won't risk his thrall talking." I hope he's right, Jackson thought. And I seriously hope that the rats are feasting on his flesh before death happens. Jackson could, it seemed, do revenge even better than me. He bent, picked up my shoes and then me, and said, "The stage is yours, Turner." Sam didn't say anything. He simply spun and led the way out of the pump room. And I crossed my fingers and hoped like hell that we were quick enough to catch the bastard. Chapter 9. Risley Street was narrow and lined with warehouses on one side and a parking lot on the other. At the far end there was a small park surrounding a high-rise building. Community housing, I knew, having seen the ugly design in other inner-city areas. Jackson and I climbed over the fence protecting the vacant lot opposite the park, then ran for the nearest building. I was once again wearing my shoes, but I'd burned a hole in the left one to take the pressure off my injured digit, and in case that wasn't enough, I was keeping it fire rather than flesh. If anyone happened to be looking our way, they'd catch little more than a flicker of light, no bigger than a match flame. It was better that than being left in the car because I couldn't damn well walk properly. We pressed against the side wall of a graffiti-covered building and peered down the narrow lane that divided the Risley Street buildings from those of the street behind it. No cars, Jackson thought, and no lights evident in any of the buildings. I hope Frederick wasn't feeding us a lie, I thought. I doubt he was capable of even thinking up a lie, Jackson thought. There's another fence to climb, barbed wire on top. I hated barbed wire. No matter how careful I was, the damn stuff always snagged either me or my clothes. Anything we can use to throw over it? I thought. Nothing I can immediately see. Well, fuck. I took a deep breath and released it slowly. I could no doubt melt the damn wire, but that might just give Ronaldo a warning that we were coming. Go. I'll follow. He disappeared around the corner. A heartbeat later, there was a slight rattle as he climbed the fence. I scanned the area for any unwanted interest in what we were doing, and then followed him. The barbed wire snagged his jacket and ripped one side open as I jumped down on the other side. Sorry about that, I thought. I tucked the torn bit under the t-shirt I was now wearing. He shrugged. It's only a jacket. Yeah, but it's a nice one. His grin flashed. So buy me a replacement, or compensate me in some other way. Now that's the Jackson I know and love. Seriousness can only last so long. He paused. Which isn't to say I'm not still furious over what happened. To both of us, I cut in softly. And we'll talk, but not now. He didn't say anything to that, and I had to wonder if talking was something he was actually willing to do. We moved on, keeping close to the grimy, graffiti-strewn red brick wall. Ronaldo's warehouse began at the end of it. Beyond it lay a more modern-looking building. Then the lane swept around the corner and joined Risley Street. We stopped for a second time. Jackson peered around the corner. 2 entrances, ground level and first floor, just as Google Street View promised. No cars in the parking space, and bars in all the windows, he thought. He glanced at his watch. Better tell Sam we're ready. I pressed the comm earpiece Sam had given me and softly said, In position. Right, came his reply. Everyone head in, and be careful. I didn't reply. I just followed Jackson around the corner, then took the metal steps up to the first floor, keeping as close to the wall of the next building as practical. I paused on one side of the first barred window and carefully peered inside. The room beyond was pitch black. If Ronaldo was in there, he was one with the darkness. And if he was there, then he was more than likely aware of my presence. He was, after all, a vampire, and my heart racing probably sounded like a damn alarm to him. I took a deep breath, then ducked past the window and paused again beside the door. Why anyone would bar the windows and then put an unprotected double-glass door between them was anyone's guess, but at least it gave me a somewhat easier way in. Ready when you are, Jackson thought. I flexed my fingers. Sparks flew, tiny fireflies that spoke of tiredness more than tension. Go, Even as I thought that, there was a crash from the front of the building. Sam and Adam were heading in. I called fire to my fingertips, then pressed them against the lock. It instantly began to glow, and in very little time was little more than liquid. I pushed open the door, but didn't immediately step inside. Instead, I threw a ball of fire into the darkness and flared it out. What my flames revealed was a bedroom, and it was a goddamn mess. There were clothes everywhere, both over the floor and on the bed. Either Ronaldo was extremely messy, or someone had gotten here before us. There was an ensuite to my right, but it too was in shambles. The drawers pulled out of the cabinet and razors, soaps, and aftershave bottles strewn all over the crisp white floor tiles. Some of the bottles were broken, perfuming the air with their pungent scents. I sent my sphere of light into the hallway and carefully followed. The one additional room on the floor was another bedroom and ensuite. It too looked as if it had been hit by a cyclone. I headed back to the door, then stopped and swung around, my gaze scanning the clothes again. Was it my imagination, or were those clothes identical to the ones scattered all over the other bedroom? I went back in to check. It wasn't my imagination. "Anything?" Sam said. "Negative," Jackson said. "Also negative," came Adam's comment. "Emily," Sam said, his voice a little sharper. "Nothing but a goddamn mess and two identical sets of clothing." I thumped the wall in frustration. It seemed luck had once again turned a blind eye. "How the fuck could he possibly have known we were on the way?" Jackson said, sounding every bit as angry as I was. "With Frederick out of the picture and PIT not informed of the operation, there's no way he should have gotten any sort of warning. Unless it was the mere fact of being unable to contact his thrall that set off alarms," Adam said. "If the state of this place is anything to go by, we didn't miss him by much." "It doesn't matter whether we missed him by a minute or an hour," Jackson growled. "We still fucking missed him." "Enough," Sam said, his tone curt. What do you mean by two sets of identical clothing?" "Just that. There are two bedrooms and each one holds the exact same clothes, same cut, same style, same colors." I paused. "After talking to the rats, we've come to the conclusion that Ronaldo might actually be two people." "Indeed. And when were you planning to inform us of this conclusion?" "The minute I thought about it," I snapped back. "Between Rory almost getting killed and then me getting kidnapped, informing PIT of anything kinda took a back seat." "What makes you believe there are two people using the Ronaldo alias?" His voice held a less accusatory note now, which was a good thing, because anything else would have tempted me to burn his ass. "What have you seen that we haven't?" "The rats let us view the tape showing Ronaldo's hit on his gaming venue." I picked up a t-shirt and sniffed it. I was no wolf, and my olfactory senses weren't all that much sharper than an ordinary human's. But I could nevertheless smell the scent of sweat and cool mint on the t-shirt. A rather odd combination. At the same time as he was doing that, he was confronting us at Rosen's apartment building. I swung around, walked into the other bedroom, and picked up the identical t-shirt. The scent on this one was woody, spicy. So while the two men might look and dress exactly the same, it seemed they preferred very different colognes. "Are you sure one of them wasn't using some form of mask or a glamour?" "Positive. And there are two of everything up here in the bedrooms." "At least that explains a few inconsistencies," Adam said. "Though it doesn't make finding him any easier." "What else did the rats say?" Sam said. "And how did you convince them to even talk to you in the first place?" "Radcliffe wants Ronaldo far more than he wants me." I headed out of the bedroom. And he didn't say much else, other than that he believes Ronaldo hasn't yet set up a den. "His use of this place would certainly suggest that," Adam said. Although he is using interstate vampires who don't appear to have a record anywhere. Sam grunted. We'll take over operations from here. Jackson, M, go home and get some rest. Annoyance surged, but it wasn't mine. Don't bite back, I thought. This is PIT's operation, not ours. Besides, I could really use the sleep right now. And I'm thinking fire, Jackson thought. Yes. Then we head to the blacksmith's first so we can fuel up. Then find a hotel and see if PIT really does have a mole. Excellent plan. I clattered down the stairs and joined the 3 men in the combined living room, kitchen, and what appeared to be an office area. It also resembled something a cyclone had left behind. Sam was picking through the paperwork and files on the desk, but he glanced up as I entered the room. Thanks for your help. Both of you. That almost sounded genuine, Jackson thought, mental tones wry. Maybe he's going soft in his old age. Unlikely, I thought. Out loud, I added, You know that formula we found in Brooklyn? The one written in the dust? He raised an eyebrow. The same one that's currently got us investigating every building in Melbourne with even the slightest connection to vinegar. Yeah, I do. What if it's not a location, but rather the number code for that airlock we found? He blinked. Clearly he hadn't considered that option either. That is certainly possible. It won't solve the thumbprint problem, but it might at least be one part of the puzzle. The thumbprint isn't actually a problem. Luke's fingerprints are a matter of police record, and the recent developments in fake skin mean we can reproduce a good enough copy to use on the scanner. You will let us know what you find in there, Jackson said. Otherwise my ass is going to be parked outside that damn door until you do. The hint of a smile touched Sam's lips. He really had begun to thaw out, and I had to wonder how much of that was because he'd given in to his body's need to ingest blood. A lot, I suspected. I can't promise anything, but if you happen to receive a thumbs down on your phone, you'll know we've discovered the scientists. He paused. Which might just be a good enough reason to keep your damn phone on you. Maybe, Jackson said. He touched a hand to my back and lightly guided me toward the broken front door. I nodded a goodbye to both Sam and Adam, but I could feel the weight of Sam's gaze following me as we left the building. But he was a puzzle I had no energy to concentrate on. Jackson ushered me into the car, then ran around to the driver's side and jumped in. In very little time, we were cruising toward the city. For the first time in ages, he actually parked at the front of our office. He obviously caught my surprise, because he half shrugged and said, With PIT tagging us, it's pretty pointless parking anywhere else and walking. But what about using the blacksmiths? Jackson had an ongoing agreement with the owner for 24-hour, no-questions-asked access, even though Jackson tended to go there only at night. Not because he was a night owl, but because he didn't want anyone knowing it was the source of his fire. As an elemental fae, he had to regularly commune with his element, or risk fading, and even death. I opened the door and climbed out. The evening was crisp and clear, the stars bright in the sky. Most of Stanley Street was retail businesses these days, and as a result, the only lights visible were the streetlights. I've actually invested in another means of getting into the blacksmiths, he said, his eyes gleaming brightly in the darkness. I raised an eyebrow. Meaning what? I broke into their roof. I laughed. You didn't! He ushered me through the front gate, then jumped ahead to open the front door. The cleaning fairy hadn't paid us a visit since we'd last been here, and paperwork and files were still scattered everywhere. It was a simple matter of installing a trapdoor in our roof, he said, and then adjusting one of the skylights in theirs. And of course the bad guys watching aren't likely to spot us leaping from one roof to another. Well, no, not if we keep low. Our old Victorian has a pediment, remember? And that should stop anyone spotting us. You've thought of everything. He placed his phone on the nearest desk, a desk that no longer held the backpack containing the laptops. Ronaldo's people had indeed come to retrieve them. Yes, I have, Jackson said. I even have a rope long enough to reach their floor. Handy. I followed him up the stairs and tossed my bag toward the bed. Very. It's certainly better than jumping down. He walked toward what he laughingly called the bathroom, a tiled area tucked into one corner of the vast room that had a shower, bath, and basin sitting in it. With no screen or curtain, it was in full view of the rest of the room, so too damn bad if you wanted privacy while bathing. But at least he did have a separate toilet. There were some things in life and relationships that were better left unshared. A trapdoor had been built to the right of this area, midway between it and the bathroom area. He pressed a button on the wall, the trapdoor slowly opened, and a metal ladder began to unfold. He climbed up, opened another door in the roof, and then motioned me up. In very little time, we were jumping across to the blacksmith's and sliding down a rope into the building. Though the flames in the old-fashioned brick furnace had been banked for the night, the heat of the embers still called to me. Ladies first, Jackson said, propping himself up on one of the old wooden workbenches. I stopped beside the furnace and brought the coals back to life, until the roar of the flames was all I could hear, and the heat of it washed over my skin. I threw my hands and head back and called it to me, though I didn't immediately feed, instead allowing the flames to play around my body for several minutes. I was enjoying the fierceness of them, the rush of heat, energy, and pleasure that came with them. Then I sighed and somewhat regretfully drew them in, refueling the inner fires. My skin still glowing with heat, I broke the connection and stepped away. Jackson's eyes gleamed, but it had nothing to do with fire and everything to do with desire. But he said only, "Why don't you go back and eat? I could be a while." I didn't argue. I just shimmied back up the rope and made my way back to our building. The first thing I did was to make a somewhat belated call to Rory. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, his voice sounding sleepy. I'd obviously woken him. "I'm well fed and well protected, although our Earth Fae is seriously hoping for an attack. I'm beginning to think all Fae are mad." I grinned. "Make that all sex mad and you might be right." "True. How are things with you? For a while there I was getting some very troubling vibes." "That's because some nasty shit went down. But I'm here. I'm alive. And the inflictor of said nasty shit is not." He hesitated. "Anything we need to talk about?" "Hunt is no longer a problem," I replied, unable to keep the satisfaction from my voice. It was infinitely better than hurt or anger. Either emotion would only have alarmed him, and he didn't need that sort of worry when he was still recovering from rebirth. He paused. "Did he hurt you too badly?" "Nothing I haven't handled before." He was silent for a longer stretch this time, telling me he'd guessed what had happened. "I hope his ending was slow and painful." "It was." "Good. Anything else I need to know?" "Frederick has been captured and is in PIT custody." "I'm surprised he's not dead." "I think they're hoping he'll lead them to Ronaldo." "A false hope, I rather suspect." "Me too." I paused. "Do you need me back there soon?" "No, not for a day or so. The fire's enough till then." Which meant he really was getting stronger. Relief spun through me. "I'll see you in a couple of days then." "Take care." "Always do." He snorted and hung up. I shoved my phone back into my bag, then set about making something decent to eat. It was nearly 2 hours before Jackson finally reappeared. By then I'd not only eaten my way through a box of donuts, but also had potluck risotto ready on the stove. "That smells divine." He leaned past me to scoop up one of the sausage pieces I'd mixed in. "Tastes pretty good too." I thought it was about time we refueled our bodies with something other than hamburgers and fries. I grabbed 2 large bowls and divided the contents between them. "There's also some buttered toast if you want it." "We had bread?" I grinned. It had a green spot or two, but I cut them off. "The odd green spot has never harmed this cast-iron stomach." I figured that. I picked up my bowl and some toast and followed him across to the sofa. For the next 10 minutes or so, there was no talking, just consuming. "That is exactly what I needed. Thanks." He rose and held out a hand. "You finished?" I nodded and gave him my bowl. "Have you any suggestions as to which hotel we should use to book the 2 rooms and do our PIT mole test?" He shook his head. "Just Google something with ground floor access." He washed the dishes while I did just that. "There's a Best Western not too far from the airport that has ground floor accommodation." "Ring up and book a room with the ID we snatched from the vamps Rory crisped," he said. "Then I'll book another in my name." I rose, grabbed my purse to fish out the appropriate wallet, then rang up the hotel and booked a deluxe room under the name of Margaret Jones, the name on the stolen credit card. Jackson made his call, and then we packed fresh clothes and toiletries into a bag, because who knew how long we were likely to be at the hotel. On the way out, Jackson grabbed a wireless motion sensor alarm from his odd-bod storage unit, the same unit that held the imagining radar device he'd used at Rosen Sr.'s apartment. It didn't take us all that long to drive across to Atwood. The hotel was also a conference center, which meant there was plenty of parking. We walked down to reception and requested adjoining rooms, then grabbed our bags and headed into the room Jackson had booked. The ground floor room was clean and rather spacious, fitted out with a king-sized bed, a TV sitting on a storage unit, a small desk and a couple of chairs. The bonus, however, was the glass sliding door that led out to the patio area. Very handy if we wanted to be sneaky about our comings and goings. Jackson handed me his bag and began setting up the motion sensor alarm. I continued on through the adjoining door. The second room was a mirror image of his. I dumped both bags onto the bed, then headed into the bathroom for a shower. A long and very hot shower that eventually managed to erase Hunt's scent from my skin. I wished it could do the same for my memories. By the time I'd finished, Jackson was already in bed and asleep. I climbed in beside him, snuggled up to his back, and very quickly joined him in slumber. I was woken hours later by his body twitching and shuddering. I blinked sleep from my eyes, and then, as a cyclone of hurt and horror swelled through my mind, emotions that were his rather than mine, realized abruptly that he was dreaming about the assault. I cursed softly and half reached out to wake him, then paused. I wasn't entirely sure he'd talk to me about the dreams, let alone the assault, so maybe it was better if I used the link rather than make any attempt to discuss what he'd experienced because of it. I closed my eyes and reached to him mentally, sending wave after wave of soothing thoughts. As his movements finally began to calm down, I added the belief, the need to express his feelings, to give them voice and, as a consequence, give the experience less power to hurt him in the future. I had no idea if it would help, but I also had nothing to lose by trying. He might have only felt echoes of what had been happening to me, but that didn't make his sense of defilement any less real. It took me a while to drift back to sleep, and I wasn't entirely sure my dreams were any less traumatic than Jackson's, because I woke up feeling less than refreshed. A knock at the door in the other room jerked me awake. I sat upright, sparks instinctively flying from my fingertips. A murmur of voices followed, then the smell of bacon and toast hit my nostrils, and my stomach rumbled in response. I threw off the sheets, dragged some fresh clothes from my bag, and got dressed. "Morning, sunshine," Jackson said as he came back into the room. "It would appear we didn't have any uninvited guests last night." I gathered that, given the alarm didn't go off. I tucked one leg under me as I sat down at the small table. "How did you sleep last night?" He shrugged. "Had a few dreams, but nothing too bad." "Right. Jackson, we need to talk." "As a certain redhead keeps insisting, I'm okay." He placed the tray on the table between us, then pulled the covers off the plates, revealing not only bacon and toast, but eggs and beans as well. "I don't think that's exactly true." "Fae don't do emotions." "Fae don't do love," I cut in. "But you have the full quota of everything else." He grinned. "That I do." I picked up the napkin and tossed it at him. "I'm trying to be serious here." "Then I seriously don't want to talk about it." I hesitated, but there was little point in going on about it. It'd only annoy him, and possibly make him even more reluctant to talk. "I'm here when you do." "Good." He took one of the plates and a couple of slices of toast. "So what is our plan of attack today?" "Well, I never did get to search Janice's place, so maybe we should go back there. She must know something. Otherwise, why would Amanda have tried to get rid of her?"
"Maybe she was simply cleaning up after herself, getting rid of anyone who could pin a connection between her and Rosen Pharmaceuticals."
"Maybe." I slapped a couple of pieces of bacon between two slices of toast and took a bite. Janice had a photo of Amanda and Ronaldo on her phone, and that photo just happened to show the car's number plate. Jackson's eyebrows rose.
"Interesting that you didn't give that piece of information to PIT.
"I actually did, but there's no reason we can't also pursue it." I took another bite of my sandwich. "Especially given the inspector didn't tell me not to."
"I'm gathering you still have that photo."
"Yeah, I do." I rummaged around in my handbag until I found Janice's phone, then brought up the pic and handed the phone to Jackson. "I'm guessing your police source will be able to trace it for us."
"No need to use her," he said. "Not when I have a contact at Vic Roads."
Which was the other name for the Roads Corporation of Victoria. "Is this another one of your stable ladies?"
"No, it's a male friend. I do have them, you know."
He glanced at his watch.
"I'll send him a text, as personal calls are somewhat frowned upon during work hours these days, apparently."
"Huh." I waited until he'd sent the text, then said, "It might also be worth talking to Janice again. I did question her, but she'd been drugged, and while she was answering all my questions truthfully, I'm not entirely sure the drug wasn't also messing with her mind. She might remember more with a clearer head."
"Given who she was sleeping with, it's more likely that Amanda, not the drug, was messing with her memories."
Jackson sat back in the chair and scrubbed a hand through his damp hair. He'd obviously been up long enough to shower before breakfast arrived.
"Let's try her house first. It's a long shot, but if Amanda was using her to steal information, it's possible she was bringing files home."
It certainly wouldn't be the first time in history someone had been used by his or her lover to gather information. He raised an eyebrow, amusement once again touching the corners of his eyes.
"And is that personal experience speaking?"
"Maybe." A grin twitched my lips. "And maybe not."
"I'm beginning to think it'd be easier to get blood from a stone than information about your past from you."
He drained his coffee, then rose.
"Shall we go?"
"Just let me do my teeth first."
"Good idea. Grotty green teeth on a redhead would not be a great look."
I snorted, tossed a bit of crust at him, and then headed into the bathroom. 20 minutes later, we were on our way. Janice's street was once again jammed with cars. As Jackson squeezed the SUV past several of them, a cab pulled into Janice's driveway. A few seconds later, she got out and strode toward the front door. "Why the hell is she out of the hospital so soon?" I said.
"Maybe she wasn't actually released."
Jackson pulled up behind a Ford.
Maybe she simply signed herself out.
Surely PIT would have stopped that. They know she was targeted.
Maybe that's the exact reason why she's been let loose. Maybe they're hoping Amanda will come a-calling again.
In which case, there'd be an agent somewhere. I glanced around. And I'm not seeing one.
PIT employs shifters. You probably wouldn't.
He unclipped his seatbelt.
We might as well go talk to her.
I guess so. I climbed out of the car, waited for another vehicle to squeeze past ours, and then walked across to the other pavement. What happened yesterday, when you were following Amanda? I asked Jackson.
We ended up at an apartment complex in Docklands. According to the security guard I questioned, she lives on the 8th floor.
He paused.
Interestingly, she was registered under the name of Felicity Hocking.
Which was the name Janice had given me earlier. Did you go question her?
His smile held little in the way of amusement. No. It was about that time I got the feeling you were in big trouble. But by the time I got back here, you were gone, and PIT were here.
He paused.
It might be wise to contact Baker and let him know Hunt no longer exists.
The cab reversed out of the driveway and drove past us. I gave it a cursory glance, then did something of a double take and stopped.
What?
Jackson said immediately. I've seen that driver before, and not in a cab. I frowned, trying to remember where, but the memory was decidedly elusive. Jackson grabbed his phone and took a quick snap of the disappearing cab.
Maybe PIT can run a plate check and see if it's legit.
If the cab's legit, it's the driver that might not be. I continued on, hurrying toward Janice's. And it might be that I'm wrong. Janice did get home safely after all. But even as I said that, part of me knew the future was whispering of death. We were 3 steps away from the drive when the entire house blew up. Chapter 10. The blast was so intense it sent us both tumbling. I ended up halfway under a nearby SUV and drew my body into a tight ball as bits of wood, metal, and God knows what else speared all around me. The SUV took the brunt of the debris, but the twinges of pain in my spine told me I hadn't escaped unscathed. Heat quickly followed, and with it came the roar of flames, although I would have thought that after the power of such a blast there'd be little left to burn. I twisted around, looking for Jackson, and spotted him half kneeling behind the driver's side rear wheel.
I'm okay,
he said.
But I'm guessing Janice won't be.
I looked over at the house. Though the air was thick with dust and smoke, it didn't do much to hide the devastation. The house was one huge pile of debris. Only one exterior rear wall remained upright, and flames were already beginning to consume that. Metal carport supports were embedded in one neighbor's wall, and holes were punched into his roof. And Janice's little Honda was now sitting in the same neighbor's yard, on its back and on fire. The house on the other side had enough blast damage to expose the front interior wall, and the fence between the 2 properties was on fire. I climbed out from under the SUV, then pulled off my jacket and shook it free of rubbish. Amanda, or someone else in Ronaldo's employ, obviously came back to finish what she'd started.
Yeah.
Jackson stopped beside me, his expression glum. There were scratches on his face, a chunk taken out of his chin, and his jeans were torn and somewhat bloody. But all in all, there wasn't much damage, considering how close we'd been.
I'll ring PIT, he said. You want to douse those flames and see if you can spot anything in the mess?
I'm not sure the police or even PIT will appreciate us contaminating a crime scene. And there wasn't much left to find, not without carefully sifting through that pile of remnants anyway.
I'm not really caring what they think right now.
His voice held an angry edge.
Not when they could have kept Janice safe and didn't.
That's a bit harsh, Jackson. They do have bigger problems right now. Not to mention a lack of staff to cope with it all. As priorities went, it wasn't really surprising Janice had been low on the list. Except Janice may have been the key they needed, he said. Ronaldo obviously feared she could tell us something, given he came back for a second shot at her. Which was true enough. I glanced around at the sound of approaching footsteps and spotted a number of people hurrying down the street toward us. There was no reaction or movement from whoever owned the houses on either side of Janice's. They were going to get one hell of a surprise when they returned from wherever they were. Go, Jackson said. I'll stop those people from coming too close. As he strode toward them, I headed for the broken front gate and lifted my right hand, as if warding off the heat of the fire consuming the little car. The flames flared briefly, as if in protest to my drawing the heat from them, then quickly faded until only the pungent smell of burned rubber remained. I turned my attention to the fire biting through both the remnants of the rear wall and the dividing fence. Its heat swirled around me, through me, and I briefly closed my eyes, enjoying the sensation before I drew it in and snuffed out the flames. But that enjoyment had come at the cost of a life. Ronaldo, I thought grimly, was going to pay for all these deaths. One way or another, no matter how long I had to fruitlessly search for the bastard, I was going to make sure of that. The fires had now disappeared, but I had no idea if any other threat remained. I stopped several feet away from the area where the front door had once been, and surveyed the huge pile of rubbish, all that remained of the house and the person who'd lived here. I couldn't go into that. I wouldn't. I'd seen death in many disguises, but if there was anything left of Janice beyond a splash of blood or the shredded remnants of flesh, then I didn't want to be the one to find it. I spun around and walked across to Janice's Honda instead. Aside from the melted tires and the dents and scrapes that were a result of being tossed through the fence, the car had actually come through relatively intact, at least when compared to the house. I knelt down and peered in through the driver's side window. Heat still radiated from the front portion of the car, but there was no scent of leaking fuel. Hopefully the thing wouldn't blow up in my face. There didn't seem to be much more than the usual assortment of rubbish and clothing that accumulated inside cars over time, but I nevertheless tugged my sleeve over my hand and, after a bit of a tussle, wrenched the door open. You're worried about leaving fingerprints? The unexpected comment made me jump. I swung around and slapped Jackson's arm. Don't sneak up on me like that. Sorry. He sounded and looked anything but. The question stands, however. The handle was hot, and we're being watched. I looked pointedly at the gathering crowd. He might have managed to keep them at a distance, but some of them had cameras, and there would no doubt be videos posted on YouTube sooner rather than later. The handle wasn't glowing with heat, so no one would have given two thoughts about your opening it with bare hands. I'd still rather be safe than sorry, thanks. I ducked down, then crawled inside the car. There wasn't a whole lot of space, but that was more because it was a small car than because it was upside down. I opened the glove compartment, and papers, tissues, and the car's service book all fell out. I gathered the papers and handed them to Jackson, then checked the storage bin in the center console. Small change, phone chargers, and candy wrappers joined the rest of the rubbish on the floor, or rather the roof. I swept a hand under the driver's seat, but couldn't find anything. Repeated the process for the passenger seat, then twisted around and began sifting through the mess that had come from the back seat. It appeared that Janice shared our love for McDonald's. Most of the rubbish consisted of their coffee cups and the occasional hot apple pie wrapper. Anything interesting in all that paperwork? I asked Jackson. I ran my hands around the sides of the seats, just in case something had been jammed between them and the console. Nothing more than service receipts and registration papers going back a couple of years. He paused as the wail of sirens began to get louder. We don't have much longer. No, Something pricked my finger. I swore and wrenched it free. Whatever it was had drawn blood, even if it was little more than a fine droplet.
You okay?
Jackson squatted in front of the door. Yeah, something just stabbed my finger. I sucked the blood from it and peered a little closer, but couldn't immediately see anything sharp.
Approach it from under the seat,
Jackson suggested. I did that before and didn't find anything. I teased a bit of flame to a fingertip and pushed the seat cushion with my other hand, creating more of a gap. Something small and metallic gleamed back at me. It's a pin of some sort. I carefully reached down and pried it free. It was one of those pin-on plastic name tag things companies give short-term visitors. This one read just that, Visitor, along with a company name, Holdright Industries. The name, for some reason, rang a bell. I handed the name tag to Jackson, then crawled out of the car.
Never heard of the company,
he said, helping me up. I have, but I can't tell you where or why. I glanced around as a police car pulled up. And the fun begins.
At least we now have PIT badges to speed up the process.
He pocketed the name tag.
Do you want to put Google to use while I go talk to the cops?
I nodded and dragged out my phone. Holdright Industries, I soon discovered, made industrial shelving and racking. I didn't really know the difference between the two, but obviously there was one. But the real question was, why would Rosen's secretary have that badge in her car? Even if Rosen's company did use either the shelving or the racking, it was unlikely Janice had gone out there personally to arrange quotes. She would have simply sent a purchase order to their office supplies department. Which meant we probably needed to contact Rosen Pharmaceuticals and talk to someone who might give us some insight, either on Holdright Industries or as to why Janice might have had the badge. A police officer approached. I shoved my phone away and resigned myself to answering his questions. Jackson had no doubt already made the statement, but I couldn't complain about cops being thorough. The fire brigade and the ambulance soon appeared, with the ambulance paramedics giving Jackson and me a quick check-over before declaring us both okay. It was a good half hour before we managed to get away. By that time, I seriously needed a caffeine hit.
I noticed our favourite cafe is a franchise not far away on Plenty Road.
His tone was amused.
We can grab something to go from there. Any luck on the Googling front?
I learned Holdright Industries makes industrial shelving.
It didn't jog any memories loose.
Not a one. I guess our best option now is to go talk to Rosen Pharmaceuticals, but not before I have tea in hand.
I wouldn't even dare suggest otherwise.
Wise man. He grinned, and in very short order we not only had our hot beverages in hand, but also a large fries to share as we drove across to Power Street, where Rosen's company was located. It was a rather plain-looking 4-story building with a cafe on one side of the ground floor and a lawyer's office on the other. The entrance to the building sat between the two. There was no parking allowed on the street immediately outside the building, so Jackson turned onto Lynch Street and found a spot there. I drained the last bit of tea from the cup, then jumped out of the car and followed him across the busy road. The building's glass doors swished open as we approached, revealing a small, somewhat dark foyer. There was a bank of elevators to our immediate left, and I spotted 2 armed security guards, one near the elevators and the other near what I presumed was a rear entrance, possibly the loading dock. A reception desk was in the middle of the foyer, with a small seating area to the right. A rather handsome middle-aged blonde glanced up from her computer as we approached the desk, and gave us a polite smile. "Welcome to Rosen Pharmaceuticals. How may I help you?"
"We need to talk to whoever handles the purchase of storage and shelving units."
Jackson pulled out his PIT badge and showed it to her. "That badge," she said, "says associate. I do not believe it has power of investigation."
"And you would be wrong,"
Jackson said, his tone as polite as hers.
However, if you wish to check our authority, you can give PIT a call. The person you'll need to talk to is Chief Inspector Richmond.
I'll have to discuss this with someone in management. Please take a seat, I shouldn't be long. A woman immune to your charms, I murmured as we walked over to the waiting area. I didn't think that was possible.
Neither did I. What's more interesting, however, is that they've seriously ramped up security.
He motioned toward the 2 security officers.
That's the first time they've had armed guards in the foyer.
It's not really a surprising step, given research was stolen and Wilson, Rosen, and now Janice were murdered.
True, although they surely wouldn't know about Janice's murder yet.
He sat down and crossed his legs, his expression contemplative as he studied the blonde.
I might have to come back when all this is over. I do so like a challenge.
Seriously, haven't you got enough women to deal with already?
Oh, I'm not talking about anything serious. A simple flirtation lasting no more than a night or so will do.
I don't think I'll ever understand the sexual drive of a dark fae.
There's nothing to understand, he said easily. We simply live for sex.
The woman in question replaced the receiver and gave us another of those polite smiles. Brad Jensen will be down to assist you shortly.
Thank you, Jackson said, his tone warm.
There was little response from the blonde. I grinned and leaned back in my chair. About 5 minutes later, a chime sounded as an elevator arrived. Then a tall, thin man with receding brown hair strode toward us.
Brad Jensen, he said. How may I help you both?
As he propped himself on the sofa beside me, I caught a whiff of garlic and tuna. Lunch, obviously. Are you in charge of ordering storage and shelving items? I asked. He nodded.
Rosen Pharmaceuticals is a large company, and we have a range of suppliers. Why?
Is one of the companies you deal with Holdright Industries?
No. They specialize in the manufacture of warehouse storage, rather than stuff suitable for our needs.
I frowned. So there'd be no work-related reason why Janice Green would have a visitor tag from them in her car.
His expression became somewhat perturbed. Janice Green is our founder's secretary, so certainly not.
I glanced at Jackson. Maybe she knew someone who worked there, I thought.
Possibly, he thought. We might have to go through her phone and do a check of all the numbers.
Tedious. And it was extremely doubtful we'd find anything, given Amanda had deleted at least one number, her aliases, from Janice's phone.
Amanda and Ronaldo will make a mistake sooner or later, Jackson thought.
I hoped he was right, but I wasn't counting on it.
Is Janice in some sort of trouble?
Brad asked, his gaze darting between the two of us. Jackson glanced at me, and I blew out a breath. How well did you know her?
Only casually, via work functions and the like.
He paused.
Did? Has something happened to her?
I'm afraid she was murdered this morning. And, I silently ascended Jackson, why is it always the woman who has to give the bad news?
In this case, because you're prettier than me, meaning he's less likely to take it badly, Jackson thought.
I'm sure there's logic in that statement somewhere. Brad scraped a hand through what little hair he had.
Shit. How did it happen?
I'm afraid I can't say anything more right now, I said. But you can't think of a reason why she might have visited Holdright?
Not officially, no.
And unofficially?
I don't know her that well, so I couldn't say.
I grimaced and stood up. Thank you for your help, Mr. Jensen. Jackson handed him a business card.
If you do think of anything, please contact us.
He glanced at the card and frowned.
I thought you were PIT officers. We're temporary ones. We've been seconded onto the current investigation.
Ah. He pocketed the card.
I hope you catch a killer.
Thanks. I gave him a smile, then headed out. Well, that was a waste of time.
It wasn't, because we've at least ruled out the possibility she was there on official business.
Which still leaves us down a rabbit hole with no exit in sight, I said.
True.
He paused while we dashed across the road.
Do you need to go see Rory?
Not until tomorrow. Why?
Because I think we have two courses of action right now. We continue the fruitless search for a lock to fit that second key we found at Wilson's place. Or we go back to the office and share the odious duty of going through Janice's phone and checking all the numbers.
He unlocked the car and we both climbed in.
Of course, it might be a whole lot easier if your memory would come to the party with the information of where you'd seen that name before.
Undoubtedly. But until that happens, there is a third choice. He raised his eyebrows.
That being?
A choice piece of work called Amanda. You did find her apartment, did you not?
I did indeed. And I think that's a very fine suggestion.
He gave the sat-nav an address in Docklands, then pulled out into the traffic.
And I seriously hope the bitch is home. Taking out another of Ronaldo's soldiers can only work in our favour.
With Frederick's disappearance, he more than likely has her under some sort of protection.
Only if he believes we know her location. And why would he think that when we've lost her every damn time we've spotted her?
I didn't think he'd be that careless after his close shave at the warehouse. He'd have known the information about his location could only come from Frederick. Still, even if Amanda wasn't at the apartment, we could search it. While it was likely Ronaldo already had any information she'd gathered, it was also possible he hadn't had the opportunity to collect whatever she'd gotten from Janice more recently. If she'd gotten anything, and wasn't just covering her tracks. Jackson found a parking spot on Bourke Street, and we walked through to Amanda's building, which fronted the Victoria Harbour Promenade. The building itself was a glass and concrete structure, with large balconies that overlooked not only the harbour, but also the Bolt Bridge and the Melbourne Star observation wheel. The first two levels seemed to consist of nothing more than restaurants and pool and gym facilities for the residents, none of which the apartment building Rory and I shared had. Maybe we should move. I killed that thought almost immediately. Moving would mean pulling apart the fire room we'd created in the third bedroom and restoring it to its original condition, and that just sounded like too much hard work. We walked into the foyer and approached the reception desk. Jackson flashed his badge again, but the guard waved his hand.
Remember you from yesterday. What can I do for you now? I'm afraid we need to get into Felicity Hocking's apartment.
He frowned.
Don't you need a warrant for that? And not if we think she's in danger, Jackson replied easily. Her lover was murdered yesterday. We have every reason to believe she may also be in danger. I'm not sure.
Listen, Mike, I said, glancing at his nameplate. We'll sign in, and we'll give you the name of our boss so you can confirm we are who we say we are. But we seriously need to get into that apartment. He hesitated, then said,
I'll call the supervisor down. He has the master keys, in case of emergencies.
In other words, he was passing the decision-making buck. Couldn't blame him for that. Tell him to hurry. He nodded and made the call. 3 minutes later, a well-built, dark-skinned man strode into the foyer, followed by two others, one male and the other female. Both projected a don't mess with me vibe, and all three were armed.
You're the PIT officers,
the first man said. According to his badge, his name was Gale. Whether that was a first name, last name, or some sort of warning was anyone's guess. Jackson offered up his badge again.
We're associate officers, seconded to investigate the murder of one Janice Green, Felicity Hocking's lover. And you need to get into her apartment.
Because we feel she may be in danger, I repeated. It is rather urgent, so if we could move this along, we'd appreciate it.
The supervisor grunted. Give Mike your boss's contact details. I hope you don't mind, but we are going to check your credentials. And if you're carrying any weapons, leave them at the desk. We're associates. Sadly, they won't give us guns. Because there's a real need for either of us to have guns, Jackson thought, his mental tone wry. I gave him the look. His grin grew. Once I handed the guard the information, he did the required check, then handed me the phone.
What is this about, Emberly? The inspector said. We're at Felicity Hocking's apartment, just about to check on her. Felicity Hocking, a.k.a. Amanda Wilson? Yes. Excellent work. Do you need backup? Is there anyone available if we did? Given the number of times you've both been attacked and left without your main weapons, as well as the quality of the information you've been retrieving, we'd find them. Which was nice to know. I think we're all right for now. Keep in contact. She hung up and I handed the phone back to the security guard.
They check out,
he said. Gale nodded, dismissed his two people, then said,
Follow me, please.
We headed up to the 8th floor and walked along the wide corridor until we reached a door situated near the building's corners. The views, I thought, would be outstanding. He knocked on the door and said,
Ms. Hocking, security here. We need to talk to you.
There was no answer. After a second try, he swiped his card through the reader to the right of the door and opened it.
I'll remain here,
he said, and stepped to one side. The longish corridor that confronted us led to what I presumed was the living area. The hallway itself was rather bland. Cool grey walls, white ceiling, and little in the way of embellishment. Maybe that was the whole point, because the view from the windows in the living area was certainly spectacular, if the bit I could see was anything to go by.
You take the door on the right. I'll take the one on the left,
Jackson said. I nodded and headed down the hall. The plush grey carpet swallowed any sound our footsteps made, and the place was eerily quiet. There was little in the way of scents in the air, which suggested Amanda didn't spend a whole lot of time here. I carefully opened the door. Like the corridor, the room, a bedroom, was a soft grey with white accents. The wall to my right was lined with built-in wardrobes, and there was an ensuite to my left. A bed and a couple of bedside tables were the only furniture in the room. Amanda lay fully clothed on the bed. Not in it. On it. And if she was breathing, I wasn't sensing it. Jackson, in here, I thought telepathically, to avoid alerting Gale I'd found her. I walked over and felt for a pulse. It was so slow it could have been a vampire's. I lifted an eyelid. Her pupils reacted to the light, but she didn't stir.
She dead,
Jackson thought. Jackson came into the room and stopped beside me. No, unconscious.
It's more likely she's been placed into a hibernated state until Ronaldo has another mission for her.
He could have at least allowed her to undress and be comfortable.
I don't think the comforts of others is all that high on Ronaldo's list of priorities.
Jackson's mental tone was wry.
We should probably use the time to search her apartment. I doubt she'll cooperate when she wakes.
She can't. Not if Ronaldo has control of her mind. I hesitated, my gaze sweeping her length. Though there'd been no movement, no sign that she was in any way stirring, a sense of foreboding was beginning to pulse through me. I think we'd better... I didn't get to finish the sentence, but that sense of foreboding sharpened abruptly. I spun around to see Gale standing at the door, his weapon out and aimed at the two of us. He was going to shoot. Amanda was awake all right, and controlling him. I swore, knocked Jackson out of the way, then flung a line of fire toward the gun and ripped it from the guard's grip. It discharged as I did so, the bullet digging into the wall above the bed rather than into either of us. Quicker than a rattlesnake, Amanda was up and running. She didn't get far. Jackson flung out one leg, caught hers, and brought her to a crashing halt face first onto the carpet. The security guard immediately threw himself at Jackson. As the two men fought, with Jackson trying to stop the guard rather than hurt him, I flung myself at Amanda, landing on her back just as she was trying to scramble upright. She went down with a grunt and swore violently at me. I grabbed a fistful of hair, yanked her head back, then wrapped a ribbon of flame around her throat, blistering her skin rather than totally severing her neck, as part of me longed to. And it wasn't even the vicious part of me. "Release him now," I growled, "or I will burn off your face." She hissed and then said, "Was the death of Shona and the two werewolves assigned to protect her not demonstration enough for you, Miss Pearson?" I blinked. Though the voice was Amanda's, the pronunciation definitely wasn't. "I'm going to fucking kill you for doing that, Ronaldo." "You were warned, were you not? You failed to live up to our agreement." "It was hardly a fucking agreement," I bit back. "And it doesn't change the fact you are a dead man walking." "Technically, all vampires are." His amusement ran through Amanda's tone. "And it doesn't change the fact you were warned to contact me nightly, and you did not. Those deaths are on your conscience, not mine." He was right. They were. But better 3 lives than the hundreds, thousands that might die if Ronaldo ever got his hands on all the virus information. I didn't know why he wanted it, and I didn't care. I just knew I would do whatever it took to stop him from getting it, even if more people had to die. "We've had nothing to damn well report at the time," I said. "So it was pretty useless ringing." "That is hardly true, given your recent excursion into Brooklyn." "Which netted you the laptops, and if you didn't get them, I don't know who did, because I didn't fucking tell anyone else about them." The sound of fighting ended abruptly. Jackson came up behind me, shaking his right hand. "That bastard has a jaw of steel," he thought. "Keep an eye on him, just in case knocking him out isn't enough," I thought. Ronaldo was, after all, a strong enough telepath to control someone right down to their body functions and breathing. The thought stalled. Was he strong enough to do that from a distance, or was he perhaps somewhere close? "Good thought. Keep him talking while I check the rest of the apartment," Jackson thought. Jackson snagged the keycard from the guard, spun some fire around him to keep him secure, then stepped over the two of us and went looking. "There was very little on the laptops, as I'm sure you're well aware," Ronaldo said. "That's not my fucking fault." "No, because we both know PIT was responsible for that little inconvenience." Meaning he did have someone inside PIT. How else could he have known PIT cleaned them out of anything useful before we got them back? "I did warn you that we wouldn't get out of Brooklyn with anything of value. But whatever they erased could probably be retrieved with a clever enough tech guy." "That is the only reason I'm not currently following through with my threat to flood the streets with the infected." Which was an odd statement if he did truly have someone in PIT. Or did his source simply not know about the state of the cloaks, and that they were all dead or dying? Ronaldo actually couldn't follow through with his threat. And not just because the majority of the cloaks were dead, and he didn't appear to have the scientists. "And how do you intend to do that, given Frederick is dead?" It was a guess on my part, but a safe enough one. As Adam had noted, it was unlikely Ronaldo would risk his thrall giving us too much information, no matter how useful Frederick might have been over the years. "He was your access point in controlling the cloaks, wasn't he?" It would appear you gained entirely too much information from that man. I should have killed him the minute I noticed his absence. Meaning he was dead, and that the rats would be feasting off his flesh if PIT hadn't gotten around to retrieving him. And I really hoped that was the case. And that desire did come from the vicious part of me. If you keep killing off your lieutenants willy-nilly, it will eventually put a crimp in your style. Not when there are so many more able-bodied witches in this world, some of whom apparently have the means and the power to create a spell capable of restricting the magic of others. He paused. That is something Frederick wasn't capable of. Actually, he was, because his last spell did succeed in fully curtailing my fire. No one else in the apartment, Jackson thought. I'll go check the remaining apartments on this floor. Watch your back, I thought. You watch yours. And yet, Ronaldo said, here you are, still annoyingly alive. Which is just as well, considering I can hardly get the information you want if I'm dead. True. I have, however, reconsidered my position. It seems Frederick was correct in his summation of you. And with that, Amanda went limp in my grip. I spun around and withdrew the ropes of fire containing the guard, and none too soon. He made an odd shuddering sound, and then somewhat groggily looked around. What the fuck just happened? You tried to shoot us. His gaze jumped to mine. No. Yes. I pressed 2 fingers against Amanda's neck. No pulse, which wasn't really surprising. We'd already gained information from his thrall. He wouldn't take a similar risk with Amanda, even if her mind and body were his to control. The woman you know as Felicity Hocking, we know as Amanda Wilson. She's not only a wanted killer, but also an extremely strong telepath. She took your mind over. He scrubbed a hand across his jaw. Well, fuck. Yeah. I rose, but didn't give him back his weapon, just in case. I'm afraid I'll have to call this mess in. PIT will need to talk to you. He nodded, his gaze on Amanda's body. She dead? Yes. Did you do it? No. And I wasn't about to go into a detailed explanation of what had happened. Instead, I got my old phone out of my bag, brought up Ronaldo's picture, and showed it to him. Do you recognize this man? He frowned and took the phone for a closer look. He doesn't live here, but his face is familiar, so it could be I've seen him around. Which didn't really help much. I shoved that phone into my pocket, then got out Janice's and used it to call the inspector. We can trace your location via this phone, she said by way of hello. Using different phones to contact me really doesn't make all that much difference. Maybe it just makes me feel safer, I bit back. Amanda's dead, Inspector, at Ronaldo's hands. It seems he's now intent on killing rather than using me. Suggesting he doesn't fully understand what you are. Or that he simply doesn't care. I glanced at Gale. We have a security guard on location who thinks he's seen Ronaldo in the building. Might be worth getting someone here to interview him more fully. I'll send one of our telepaths. In the meantime, get his people to secure the apartment. Will do, Inspector. But not before we did a more thorough check. I put the phone away, then returned my gaze to Gale and said, Are you up to guarding this place until PIT can get more people here? He nodded and climbed to his feet. We'll lock the floor down for everyone except residents. Thanks. He went out as Jackson came back in. Anything? Jackson shook his head. There's 7 other apartments on this floor, but he wasn't in any of them. I showed Gale his picture. He's seen him, even if he can't place him. Then that's something PIT can check. You called them? I nodded. They're sending people over.
Which means we need to run a check of this place ASAP, then get the hell out. I do not want to take part in another Q&A session.
We began a thorough search, but didn't turn up anything. Not even anything that suggested Amanda spent a whole lot of time here. Beyond clothes, there was little in the way of food, or even the usual bits and pieces that came with living in one place for any length of time.
Well, I guess it was a somewhat forlorn hope, Jackson said.
I dumped the gun on Amanda's bed, then headed for the front door. True, but it's nevertheless frustrating that we keep hitting walls. Gale looked around as we approached. There was a decent-sized bruise forming on the right side of his jaw.
Finished? Yes.
Jackson gave him back the keycard.
Keep this place locked until PIT gets here. And sorry about the bruise. What about my gun? Will that be needed as evidence? Because I'll have to report it if so. That's not my call. The weapon is inside, however.
He nodded and we retreated. The two security officers who'd been downstairs were now stationed near the elevators. Neither of them said anything as we called the elevator and walked inside. So back to the office, I said as the doors closed.
I guess so. It's not like we have many other options right now.
No, we didn't. Not unless we wanted to conduct the proverbial needle-in-haystack search and wander around Melbourne looking for the locker that matched the second of Wilson's keys. Once we were back in the office, I'd made us both a drink, then bumped the contact list from Janice's phone across to his. I'll take A to M, and you can take the rest.
Righto.
He sat down, booted up his computer and began checking the numbers online. I did the same thing. Janice, unfortunately, had a lot of people in her contacts list. This, I said after 20 minutes, is as tedious as I thought it would be. I need another tea.
Is that a hint for me to get off my rump and get you one?
I smiled. Yes. How far along are you?
Just hit X.
I raised an eyebrow. Someone has a surname starting with X?
Xavier, though I have no idea whether it's a first or last name. The number doesn't seem to be listed on Google.
Must be a private number. I scrolled to the next screen, the H section.
Probably. I'll call it and see what happens.
He pushed up.
You want a donut with that cuppa?
There's none left. I demolished them last night when I was making the risotto.
Gluttony at its finest.
Totally. I do believe they're chocolate chip. I paused and sat upright as a name practically jumped out at me. What the hell is Janice doing with James Hamberley's number in her phone? Jackson frowned.
Who?
James Hamberley. He was Denny Rosen Jr.'s sometime lover and one of the victims of the Aswang.
Ah, him.
Jackson propped his butt on my desk rather than heading down to the coffee machine.
I was under the distinct impression Senior hated Hamberley, so why would Janice have his number in her phone?
Maybe she called Hamberley for him. Rosen must have talked to him at some point. Why else would Junior say that Hamberley couldn't be bribed?
And yet, despite that, Senior considered him a leech, Jackson said. That strikes me as a little odd now that I think about it.
Doesn't it just? I pressed the number and listened as the call went through.
Holdride Industries, a male voice said. How may I help you?
I was so totally caught off guard that I didn't immediately answer.
Hello,
the voice said again. Sorry. I'd like to speak to James Hamberley, please.
Oh, James is no longer with us. I can, however, put you through to his replacement, Mark Terrell.
No, it's a personal matter. Thanks.
As Alice was wont to say, curiouser and curiouser, Jackson said. And that's undoubtedly the reason why Holdright Industries rings a memory bell. If Hembley worked there, he probably had their name tags or other paraphernalia at his house.
He might also, I said slowly, have a range of industrial shelving or racking, both at his office and at home.
Indeed. And given that name tag you found, our first port of call would have to be his office.
Jackson walked across to his desk and snagged his jacket off the back of the chair.
You got the key?
There's no indication Wilson had anything to do with Hembley. Even so, I grabbed my bag to check.
Doesn't mean there isn't some sort of link. We might not have uncovered it yet, that's all.
Possible, though I personally doubted it. I found the second locker key sitting in a side pocket. Still there. I'm glad Frederick was so intent on torturing me for information that he failed to check what I might be carrying. Jackson motioned me toward the door.
Wonder if PIT has rescued him yet.
They'd only be collecting his body if they do. Ronaldo did kill him.
I'm betting no one will be sad about that.
I'm betting you're wrong. I think Sam and PIT had plans for our Dark Sorcerer.
I know Sam did, but it didn't actually involve anything official.
I glanced at him. And what exactly are you implying by that? Amusement crinkled the corners of his eyes.
You know exactly what I'm implying. But if you want it spelled out, he was extremely angry when he discovered what had happened to you.
Yeah, he was so damn angry he allowed you to come running ahead of the three of them.
He couldn't have stopped me.
Jackson started the SUV and set the sat-nav for our destination.
And I did get a head start on them while they were dealing with Frederick.
He's a vampire, or at least a pseudo one, I replied. If he wanted to catch up, he would have.
He did. He wasn't far behind when you ran into me, remember?
He cast me a curious look.
Why don't you want to believe that some part of the man still cares for you?
I sighed. Because it would just lead to heartbreak, and I've already had my fair share of that this lifetime.
But it could also lead to happiness, and that's what you've been searching for all these centuries, isn't it?
A smile ghosted my lips. It's not going to happen.
You're sure of that?
Yes.
I still think you could at least talk to the man. He obviously has something he wants to say.
I crossed my arms, a move I was well aware spoke of a need to protect myself. And I think that you should keep your nose out of this particular aspect of my life.
Impossible.
Then how about you concentrate on driving?
I am one of those rare males who can actually concentrate on two things at once.
I snorted. Then think about the fact that if something does happen between me and Sam, the sexual part of our relationship is finished.
As I've already said, that is already a foregone conclusion.
Or so he dreamed. When I'd combined our spirits and saved his life, I'd apparently not only created the link that allowed us to now communicate telepathically, but I had also leaked some of my ability, or curse, depending on how you viewed it, for prophetic dreams. I shifted slightly to look at him more fully. Have you had any more dreams?
No, and don't change the subject.
I blew out a somewhat frustrated breath. If I agree to talk to Sam when all this shit is over, will you drop the subject as of now?
Yes.
Good. Done, I said.
I expect a follow-through report.
And I expect that won't be at all interesting. The navigation system politely informed us we'd missed a turn. So much for his being able to concentrate on two things at once. Holdright Industries was in one of the new industrial estates in Cranbourne. Jackson pulled into one of the parking spots at the front, and we both climbed out. The building was unremarkable, a typical metal-roofed concrete warehouse with a 2-story office section stuck onto the front. The reception area was on the small side, but comfortably furnished. A middle-aged woman looked up from the reception desk and smiled. Unlike the women at Rosen Pharmaceuticals, this one was actually genuine. "Welcome to Holdright Industries. How may I help you both this afternoon?" I showed her my badge. "We need to talk to someone in charge." "Sure. If you don't mind waiting a couple of minutes, I'll ask Frank to come down here." She made the call while we waited, and a few minutes later a balding man in his 50s came down and offered his hand.
"Frank Newton," he said. "How can I assist you both?"
"This may seem a somewhat strange request," I said, "but we need to get into James Hamberley's office and inspect whatever storage units he has there." He frowned.
"You know James Hamberley is dead, don't you?"
"Yes, we do. We still need to check out his office, I'm afraid."
"Sure, but can I ask why?" "We're not really in a position to say," Jackson said. "But it involves the theft of some research matter."
Frank's eyebrows rose.
"And you think James was involved? Because he was a decent man, and I refuse to believe that's possible."
Many an otherwise decent man had gotten involved in shady dealings, but I bit the comment back and simply said, "At the moment, we're only checking possible leads. It may turn out that this is just another red herring." Frank grunted and turned around.
"This way, then."
He led us through a door to the rear of the reception room and up a set of stairs. There was a long corridor lined with a series of glassed offices. James Hamberley's was the last one on the right. Frank knocked, then entered without waiting for a response. Mark Terrell, a sallow-skinned, brown-haired man, looked at us over the top of his glasses.
"Is there a problem, Frank? These two PIT officers need to check out the storage units Hamberley was using. That's those three over there by the wall, and the upright near the door. The ones behind me and you."
He paused, his gaze scanning us.
"What's Hamberley done?"
"Possibly nothing. I started checking the units, looking for a number that matched the key. We just have the tedious task of checking all possibilities, however remote."
"Does this have anything to do with his murder?"
he asked.
"Not his murder, no," Jackson said. "Does the name Janice Green mean anything to you?"
Both men shook their heads. None of the locks matched the number of my key, so I moved across to the upright.
"Why?"
Frank asked.
"Because she was murdered yesterday, and there was a Holdright Industries badge in her car. She also had Hamberley's number in her cell." "We deal with a lot of people,"
Frank began doubtfully. Jackson held up his hand, stopping him.
"I know. As we've said, we're merely chasing down all possibilities."
"No match with these units," I said. "Do you mind if I double-check the remaining ones? Just in case?" Mark waved a hand in invitation.
"Where did she work? I might not know her name, but I'll probably know the company." "Rosen Industries," Jackson said. "Not a company we supply to."
Mark hesitated.
"I think we did do a quote for them at one stage, though. Hang on, and I'll grab the file from the archive."
The archive turned out to be a box sitting on the top of the upright cabinet. Mark fished through it until he found what he was looking for, a file in a suspension folder bearing the name of Rosen. He handed it to Jackson, who opened it up and did a quick scan.
"Just quotes, as you said, and several years old at that."
He handed back the file, then glanced at me.
"Anything?"
I checked the desk drawer, just in case. Unsurprisingly, it also wasn't a match.
"No." "Sorry we couldn't be of more help,"
Frank said. I shrugged. It was always a long shot, but thanks for your cooperation. Frank nodded and took us back downstairs. Once we were in the car again, I said, "Now what? Hamberley's place?"
"I don't think we have any other choice. I'm right out of options as to where else to look."
"That makes two of us." I sighed and scrubbed a hand through my hair. It had been a hell of a day, and my energy levels were beginning to flag. Not because I needed fire, but simply because I was tired. Even a phoenix needed a decent night's sleep occasionally.
"We can leave Hamberley's until tomorrow if you'd prefer,"
Jackson said, obviously catching those thoughts. I wrinkled my nose. I'd rather just get it over with. That way we've a clear run for new options tomorrow.
Jackson snorted. "Because we're so overrun with options right now."
"Hey, we just might be after a decent night's sleep."
"And tomorrow the Wish Fairy will serve us Ronaldo's head on a platter." I grinned.
"Or the rats will."
"That is even more unlikely."
He paused as he reversed out of the parking spot.
"You want to punch Hamberley's address into the GPS?"
As I did, he added,
"If the rats uncover Ronaldo's whereabouts, I very much doubt they'll inform us, no matter what they might have agreed to."
"And I think they will, if only because Radcliffe knows how dangerous I can be, and will want that firepower as backup."
"He's too egotistical. He wants Ronaldo's scalpel to himself."
"He may have an ego the size of a planet, but he's already lost a number of men in Ronaldo's attacks."
"The very reason why he won't want our help. He'll want to save face and prove he can handle any situation."
"I guess time will tell which of us is right." His grin flashed.
"We can always place a small wager on the matter."
I raised an eyebrow. "What kind of wager? Or is that a really stupid question?"
"It can be anything you want."
"Fine. Dinner at a fancy restaurant of my choice."
"Done. And if I win—"
He paused, as if considering his options. The wicked grin that touched his lips had all sorts of possibilities racing through my mind. "Yes?" I said, when he didn't immediately go on.
"You do my ironing for a week."
"What?" I all but spluttered. "Are you crazy?"
"Have you seen the state of my wardrobe?"
"Yes, but me, ironing."
"You're disappointed it's not something sexual. Go on, admit it."
"I'm shocked more than disappointed." I grinned. "It seems you still have a few surprises up your sleeve."
"It'd quickly get boring if I didn't."
I was pretty sure that being involved with Jackson, on any level, would never get boring.
"And I, my dear Emberly, would say exactly the same thing about you."
"I was very boring before I met you. It was supposed to be Rory's turn to raise merry hell this century."
"Once all this shit with Ronaldo and the research is over, PIT will go back to ignoring us, and things will get back to normal."
He paused.
"Or as normal as things ever get when you're running a PI agency."
Somehow I really doubted normal was something that would ever be applied to our lives again. Not if what both Lan and Grace had said was true. Hamberley lived in one of those beautiful old Melbourne streets with wide footpaths and huge plane trees that arched over the road, creating a living green tunnel to drive through. His house was hidden behind a 6-foot green metal fence, but it was nowhere near as tidy as the other houses on the street. Weed and bushes scrambled wildly over the fence, and it wasn't a result of his being dead. It had been like this the last time I'd come here. As we walked over to his gate, I rather warily eyed the bushes that all but hid his neighbour's yard. The elderly woman who owned the place had jumped out at me with questions and scared me half to death when a prophetic dream had sent me here after the Aswang, but far too late to save Hamberley. Thankfully, the old girl appeared to be elsewhere today. We opened the gate and walked up to the front door. This time it was locked, and yellow and black police tape was barring our entry. Jackson took the lockpicks out of his pocket, and in very little time the door was open. He stepped through the tape, his footsteps echoing as he moved into the front room, Hamberley's bedroom. I followed him in. That odd, almost chemical smell that had been here last time was gone. The air held only a slightly acidy taint that spoke of the fire that had almost wiped out the kitchen. Jackson walked across to the mahogany wardrobe.
"Nice, but not lockable."
"No, I glanced around the room, but other than fingerprint dust, nothing seemed to have changed. I wonder why this place is still under police wraps. We know what killed Hamberley, and we've dealt with it.
Yeah, but the wheels of officialdom tend to move very slowly, so his body might not have been released by the coroner as yet.
He opened the wardrobe doors and rummaged around.
No files or any other paperwork.
Though I doubted Hamberley would have kept anything important in his bedside tables, I nevertheless checked them. As expected, there was nothing more than socks and undies. I headed out. The letters I'd seen in my dream were still sitting on the small table in the hall, and one of them caught my eye. That's why Holdright Industries seemed so familiar. I picked one up and showed it to Jackson. Hamberley had mail from them.
Jackson frowned. Why would they be sending him mail when he worked there?
I can find out. I ripped the envelope open and quickly scanned the letter. It's nothing more sinister than a superannuation update.
Huh.
Jackson moved past me and went into the next room.
There are a couple of cabinets in here.
On my way. I dropped the letter onto the table and stepped away, only to stop suddenly when the return address on the other letter caught my eye. Rosen Industries. I quickly opened it. Inside were a letter and a check for $2,000. Holy fuck! Jackson's head appeared around the corner.
What?
Rosen Sr. was sending money to Hamberley. I scanned the letter's content, but all it said was, "Full services rendered, July," with Rosen's signature at the bottom. A couple of grand a month, if this is any indication.
Wonder if the company was paying him, or if it was coming out of his own pocket.
I glanced at the envelope again, and realized that it hadn't actually been posted. Was that why Janice had been at Holdright Industries? Had she been delivering the money for her boss? If I had to guess, I'd say personal payment. Otherwise, he'd be using company checks, not personal ones, wouldn't he?
Well, if it was a bribe to keep Hamberley away from Junior, he wasn't honoring it.
But it does at least explain why Rosen thought he was a leech. Even if the bastard had lied to us about not having much contact with Hamberley. I dropped the envelope back onto the desk, then walked into the next room. This was a combination office and spare bedroom, and because it was closer to the kitchen and the fire that had threatened to wipe the place out, it had the faintest sprinkle of soot over everything. There were 2 cabinets to one side of the desk, but neither had our key's number. Wonder if he had a shed. I moved out of the bedroom and headed toward the kitchen. I didn't bother checking the living area, as I knew from the last time I was here there were no cabinets in there, and the only paperwork was old newspapers and magazines.
I'll go look.
Jackson pressed a hand against my hip, lightly pushing me to one side so he could get past. As he went out into the rear yard, I started searching the kitchen drawers and cabinets. The bottom drawer near the end of the counter turned out to be filled to the brim with all sorts of bills and other bits. Though I doubted anything useful would be found, I nevertheless pulled the drawer out, dumped it on top of the counter, and began sifting through the papers. Jackson came back just as I'd finished. "Anything?" I asked. He shook his head.
There's a small shed and several drawers containing tax and super paperwork, but nothing even remotely interesting.
I frowned and shoved the drawer back home. There's got to be something here. That money can't have been a bribe to keep Hamberley away from his son. Rosen was well aware the relationship was ongoing when we asked him about it. There has to be another reason behind Rosen giving Hamberley that sort of money.
Something like hiding important information, perhaps.
Maybe. I shrugged. Hamberley's certainly the last person anyone would have thought to ask about hidden research information. Senior didn't exactly hide his thoughts about his son's relationship with the man, did he?
No.
Jackson leaned a hip against the counter.
Maybe Hamberley has storage facilities elsewhere.
I didn't find any indication of it in the pile of bills, and there surely would have been. I drummed my fingers on the counter, my gaze scanning the scorch marks up the wall and across the ceiling. My thoughts stalled. Old places like this were very popular with renovators because the steep roofline meant it was very easy to build a loft into them. Hamberley's place didn't appear to have one, but that didn't mean he wasn't using the space or storing stuff up there. I pushed away from the bench and headed into the laundry. The access hole was an unusually large one. I jumped up, grabbed the hanging cord and pulled it down. A set of metal steps similar to the ones Jackson had installed in our office folded down from the roof.
"It appears unusually bright up there," Jackson noted.
I climbed to the top of the sturdy ladder and looked around. There were a couple of skylights in the rear portion of the roofline. And that wasn't all. While there might have been no evidence of a loft from the front of the house, the entire area under the roof had been extensively converted. It was bright and white, with two distinct panelled spaces consisting of a room immediately to my left and an office area to my right. The latter had a large desk and 5 filing units, 2 4-drawer and 3 of the shorter 2-drawer ones, and a comfortable-looking sofa. Hamberley obviously hadn't gotten any of those up that ladder, so there had to be a secondary access point somewhere else.
"Anything else of interest?" Jackson asked.
"You could say that." I climbed into the loft and waited until he did the same.
"Whoa,"
he said.
"Hamberley was certainly intent on keeping something secret."
"And from the look of it, neither PIT nor the cops have been up here to investigate. That strikes me as odd."
"Not really. Not given Hamberley was the victim of the Aswang and involved with Junior rather than Senior. At least as far as anyone was aware."
He waved a hand to the left.
"I'll tackle the room."
His footsteps echoed on the wooden flooring, smothering the sound of mine as I walked across to the desk. There were several folders sitting in an in-tray, each one bearing someone's name. I picked up the top one and flipped it open. The images that greeted me had my eyebrows rising, if only because they were of Hamberley and someone who wasn't Rosen Jr. in sexually explicit positions. The man might not have looked like much, but he certainly had an imagination, if these photos were anything to go by. I checked out the rest of the folders. While each one contained a different man with Hamberley, many were not only sexually explicit, but also veered heavily into BDSM, piss play, and even some erotic asphyxiation. "Hamberley's been photographing his conquests," I said. "Some of these images are interesting, to say the least."
"I don't think I want to know,"
Jackson said.
"But this is where he's processing them. It's a fully kitted-out photo lab."
"Well, he certainly wouldn't be getting these images printed down at the local office supply place, let me tell you." A door creaked.
"There's also a small photography studio set up behind the lab. The setup looks professional."
I put the folders back and walked over to the first of the taller cabinets. It wasn't locked, but the number was so familiar, I stared at it for several seconds before it actually registered. It seemed I was wrong, and Jackson had been right. Wilson did have something to do with Hamberley, because I just found the lock that matched the second damn key. Chapter 11. I grabbed the key from my bag and shoved it into the lock, just to be doubly sure. It turned. "Houston, we have found the cabinet."
"What?"
"The missing cabinet, the one that matches our second key, is sitting here right next to Hamberley's desk." Jackson hurried back, his expression one of disbelief.
"Why the fuck would Professor Wilson have a key to Hamberley's filing cabinets?"
"I have no idea." I started going through the files and discovered, rather unsurprisingly given what I'd already seen, an extensive catalogue of explicit photographs.
"He can't have been involved in whatever scheme Hamberley was running,"
Jackson said.
The government would have run background checks on everyone involved in the virus research, and something like this, which rather looks like some sort of blackmailing scheme if Rosen's check is anything to go by, should have had alarm bells ringing.
You'd think so. I paused to open the next drawer. More photos, but this time they were simply nudes, rather than sexually explicit images. Maybe Hamberley was running a photography studio, and the blackmail portion of it was just a profitable sideline. Most of these look rather professional.
To what aim, though?
He picked up a folder and skimmed through it.
Surely there can't be much of a market for naked middle-aged men.
We'd probably be surprised. I closed the drawer and moved across to one of the smaller units. It had the same key number, as did the one next to it. I guess it was easier than wrestling with a multitude of different keys, although it still didn't answer the question of why Wilson had a copy of the key in his possession. I pulled out the top drawer and discovered invoices and receipts rather than photos. I plucked one folder out, dumped it on the table, and started going through it. Jackson opened another drawer and flicked through the files.
Ah, here we go.
He pulled a folder free and opened it up.
Rosen Jr. in all his glory, and in some compromising positions with several older men.
Is one of them Hamberley?
Yes. They weren't taken in the studio up here, but rather in the bedroom below.
He turned one of the photos around.
Shot from above, too, so I suspect Junior wasn't aware of what Hamberley was up to.
Or he damn well didn't care, I said. He didn't have a very high opinion of his father, remember?
But he did have a good opinion of Hamberley, and I doubt that would have been the case if he was aware Hamberley was blackmailing his father.
It would certainly explain the check, and why Janice was handing it over rather than Rosen. He wouldn't have risked going anywhere near his blackmailer. He wouldn't want anyone wondering why he was so regularly meeting someone he supposedly hated, and to start investigating.
True,
Jackson said. I opened another folder, and the signature on the first invoice immediately caught my eye, simply because it didn't match the signature on all the other invoices I'd seen so far. Can you decipher that? I offered the invoice to Jackson. He glanced at it, and his eyebrows rose.
No, but I don't have to because I've seen it before. That's Professor Wilson's signature.
I flicked through the rest of the invoices. He's signed most of these, so he was definitely involved in at least the official portion of Hamberley's business, if not the unofficial.
Yep.
Jackson handed me back the invoice.
I guess the unanswerable question, at least until someone finds the professor, is how the hell the two of them knew each other. They didn't exactly move in the same sort of circles.
No, but maybe they were school friends or something. I put the folder back and picked up another. Or maybe the professor had a secret salacity for men, and that's how the two met. He certainly had the money to help set up this sort of operation. From the little I knew of Hamberley, he didn't.
But surely if the professor was bisexual, Amanda would have picked up on it.
Not necessarily. Plenty of men the professor's age prefer to hide their true sexuality under the banner of normality. And Amanda was fucking him for specific information. If the professor had been closeted for years, she probably wouldn't have even noticed.
Jackson grunted. If the two of them were partners, then there's a small chance Wilson might have kept some information here. And that means we'll have to go through every damn drawer and file.
I don't like our chances of finding anything. I nevertheless dragged the chair across to make myself comfortable for the long task ahead. As tasks went, this was even more tedious than going through every number on Janice's phone. Dusk came and went, and my stomach was beginning to send out serious feed me or else signals by the time I reached the final cabinet. I pulled out the first folder, then paused as I caught sight of something sitting at the very back of the drawer. I pulled the files forward, then reached in and grabbed it. It was a small cash tin. I shook it lightly, and something rattled inside. And it didn't sound like change. I sent a sharp blast of heat at the padlock, melting it in an instant, then pulled it free and opened the tin's lid. Inside were more than a dozen USB drives. My heart began beating a little faster, even though I knew it was totally possible these drives held nothing more than explicit photographs. I rose, turned on Hambly's computer, and tapped my fingers on the desk as I waited for the thing to boot up.
You found something?
Jackson slammed the third drawer closed and opened his final one. I'll tell you in a minute. Thankfully, Hambly didn't have his laptop password protected, so I shoved in a USB and opened it up. Inside was a series of Word files, most of them at least 5 years old. I picked one at random and double-clicked it. What it revealed were research notes. Not the ones we were looking for, but research notes nonetheless. Looks like I was wrong again, and you were right, I said. I think we might have just found the missing notes. And if we have, that means Wilson wasn't only involved in this little blackmail scheme. He was also storing the backup copies of his research here.
You're fucking kidding me.
No. I ejected that USB and inserted another one. More Word files. More research notes. Jackson came up behind me, watching as I continued searching through each of the USBs. We didn't hit anything useful until the 8th one, and while it wasn't about the virus, it certainly was about the telepathy inversion device. I glanced at Jackson. Was Wilson working on that before he was given the virus project?
I have no idea. Try the next one.
I did, but it was back to older notes. The 10th one, however, very much reminded me of the earlier notes I'd taken for Baltimore, Wilson's counterpart over at the Chase Medical Institute. The remaining USBs were more up to date. We'd definitely found our pot of research gold.
The question that now has to be answered, Jackson said grimly, is what the fuck do we do with them?
I frowned. We give them to PIT.
The minute we do that, all bets are off with the Syndicati, and we really don't need to be dealing with their shit when Ronaldo is still on the loose.
But we can't leave them here. Given the amount of time we've been in this place, anyone following us is going to suspect we may have found something. I waved a hand around the room. This space isn't exactly hard to find.
No, but it won't matter if we hide them out in the open. I doubt Ronaldo or even Peretti will suspect USBs placed in the various folders hold anything more than backup naked pictures.
Probably not, but it's still a hell of a risk.
But less of a risk than taking them with us and getting stopped again.
I hesitated, then nodded. He was right. They probably were a whole lot safer here than they were with us right now, especially given the possible leak at PIT. We proceeded to randomly scatter the USBs through the various folders, and also placed a couple in the chemical storage unit inside the photo lab. All we had to do now was try to remember all the different locations.
That's something PIT can worry about, Jackson said as we finally headed out of the house. After all, we're only associates.
And hopefully not even that once all this shit is over, I said. But I'm thinking, given what Lan...
Ms. Pearson!
An aristocratic and familiar voice said from the shadows of the gate. I squeaked in fright and jumped several feet sideways, fire automatically leaping from my fingertips. A reaction I was going to have to watch, as I really didn't want to out myself as something other than human.
Sorry, I did not mean to frighten you,
Perella continued, amusement clearly evident as he stared at us down the long length of his nose. Jackson stopped beside me.
Why the fuck are you here? We did have an agreement, remember? One that you are not living up to, Perella said. I thought a little chat might be in order before I ordered a resumption of hostilities. I wouldn't recommend doing that, Jackson said rather philosophically. Because we're both over being attacked, and are just as likely to kill first, ask questions later right now. So I gathered from that little spark display.
Perella shed the rest of the shadows from his body. If he was in any way perturbed by the thought of being crisped, it wasn't showing.
What else did you find in Brooklyn? Or what remains of it after you burned more than half of it down?
Other than rotting red cloaks, I'm gathering, I asked. He raised a silvery eyebrow.
Why would the cloaks be rotting?
I shrugged. The jury is out on whether it's a natural progression of the virus or the result of Luke's death.
So the rumors are true. You did kill him.
And his tame witch. I paused. Said witch was also Ronaldo's thrall. It seems you and your bosses were more than a little wrong about the threat he represents.
We are beginning to see that. Then why aren't you taking the fucker out?
Jackson said.
We might be able to if he's now without both his sorcerer and the spells that have been keeping him hidden,
Perella said.
What is the situation with the research notes? Did you find them in Brooklyn?
No. We found Luke's office and a rather stout-looking airlock.
Has PIT accessed that airlock?
I shrugged. Your guess is as good as ours. It isn't like they'd tell us, and we can't exactly ask anyone else, given Luke is Ash and the cloaks haven't a brain between them. He raised an eyebrow. I suspected amusement, though it wasn't actually showing in his expression. Maybe it was such a foreign emotion, his face was incapable of making the appropriate movements.
What was in the backpack the rats said you carried out of Brooklyn?
Laptops with nothing more dangerous than office supply orders. I shrugged. We gave them to Ronaldo to get him off our backs.
And why would you do that without informing us, the rats or the wolves?
Because Ronaldo's tame witch was infected, and Ronaldo was using him as a conduit to control the cloaks. He threatened to infect the city if we even thought about mentioning them to anyone else.
Which I hate to admit is a perfectly good reason to not set up any sort of trap.
He paused.
Why are you here?
We're here because Janice Green had Hamberley's name on her phone, and considering the hatred Rosen had of the man, we figured it might be worth searching his house. Perella frowned.
But Wilson had no connection to Hamberley, so why would you think the notes would be found here?
We didn't, Jackson said easily.
We're just covering all our bases. I'm still not seeing the connection.
James Hamberley had some very explicit photos of Rosen's son with a number of men, I said. And he was blackmailing Rosen to the tune of a couple grand a month.
Given it was possible he went after more than cash,
Jackson continued.
We searched the place from top to bottom. Unfortunately, the only thing we discovered was that Hamberley and his many photo subjects are into some serious kink.
But you're more than welcome to go discover that for yourself. I stepped to one side and waved a hand toward the house.
Thanks, but I'll take your word on that particular matter. Hand over your purse.
I did so without comment. He found Wilson's key and held it up.
What is this?
The other key we found at Wilson's. We're still searching for a damn match. You already have the information we found with the first key. He replaced the key and then handed back the purse. I slipped it back over my shoulder, glad he didn't bother checking my phone, which held all the photographs of the notes we'd found at Junior's. Notes he didn't have. I'm gathering you and your syndicati cronies haven't found the research notes DeLuca's hidden somewhere.
No, we have not.
He paused.
Nor does anyone in his den appear to know.
You know the den is working with Ronaldo, don't you?
No, we did not.
He contemplated me for a moment.
I don't suppose you would consider working with us when the current search is over. You are very good at uncovering information few others seem able to.
It's amazing how well the fear of fire will loosen lips, I said. But you and I working together? One of us would be dead within hours, and it would not, I'm afraid, be me. I'd been wrong before. His face was capable of cracking a smile, but man, it was a scary thing to behold.
Shame. We could have had an interesting partnership. Getting back to the business at hand,
Jackson said, his voice holding an edge that expressed amusement rather than annoyance.
I gather you're still having us tailed. No need when the rats are playing that particular game. They certainly don't miss much of what is going on in this city.
Except when it comes to Ronaldo, I said. Did you know he is a source in PIT itself, and that he might actually be two people rather than one?
The rats told us the latter, and I suspect it's not so much a source in PIT as someone he's able to read from some distance.
Which is probably why the inversion devices were taken from Rosen Pharmaceuticals, Jackson thought.
Despite their denials of a leak, maybe they suspect one of their people is unwittingly passing on information.
Possible, I thought. To Perella I added, how did you know we were here if you're not tailing us? The rats again?
Yes. The fact you were in the house so long had them suspecting something might have been found.
But why would they then contact you?
We have an agreement in place regarding any virus research they might acquire. Because you're a major part of the current search for said research, we're also regularly informed of your whereabouts.
So why didn't they come here and confront us? Why did you? The rather scary smile flashed again.
I always make a point of seeing those I suspect might be playing me for a fool, as I believe in giving everyone a chance before I step in and kill them.
How very civilized of him. Jackson's mental tones were dry. But I'm betting there are hundreds, if not thousands of corpses rotting in the ground who'd dispute that statement, he thought. So this, I said, trying to stop my lips twitching in amusement, is our first and only warning.
Yes. Give me information as you find it, or we will come after you whenever we suspect you have something. And if innocents get hurt in the process...
He shrugged.
So be it.
Warning heeded, Jackson said.
Just don't expect goddamn miracles, because we've done nothing but chase dead ends these last few days.
And, I added, giving Perella my sweetest smile, you'd better make damn sure that anyone you send after me is very aware of the consequences that come with attacking me. As we've already said, we're seriously sick of being targets, and we will burn first and ask questions later from here on in.
I suspect PIT will not approve of such action,
Perella said, amusement cracking his features again.
But to echo your words, warning heeded. Have a good night.
He gave us a polite nod and disappeared into the shadows. I eyed the faint heat of his body until he disappeared into a car, then said, shall we go back to the hotel and wait for fate to throw us another surprise?
Sounds like a plan.
Jackson touched a hand to my spine, lightly guiding me across the road to our SUV.
Do you want to grab something to eat on the way there, or just order room service?
The latter. I paused. I also think we need to ring Baker and update him on events. He needs to know he's looking for two people, not just one. Jackson nodded as he pulled out of the parking spot.
Might as well do that now, otherwise we might just get a polite confrontation from them.
I pulled my phone out of my purse and did just that, then shoved the phone away and yawned hugely. Sorry, didn't get much sleep last night. Jackson glanced at me as he pulled out of the parking spot.
Dreams? Or ugly memories resurfacing?
Again, the latter. I didn't bother telling him they were his memories as much as mine. I doubted he'd believe me.
So much for saying you're okay.
Nightmares are a natural part of any traumatic event, Jackson. It's often the brain's way of trying to make sense of what happened. I paused. As I've said, I've learned how to cope. But I'll go to a therapist if it becomes evident I need to. But you've got to promise me to do the same.
But I wasn't.
You were, I cut in. And it would have felt even more invasive for you because you had no warning. At least I knew what was going to happen and could fortify myself mentally against it. He didn't immediately say anything.
And physically?
I felt like reaching out and shaking him. I'm sore, as you can imagine, but that too will heal with time and patience. He nodded, and we drove on in silence. Once we were back at the hotel, we ordered our meal. Then I took a long shower, needing to wash the dust and grime of the day away, and wished I could so easily do the same to the lingering physical reminders of both Frederick's and Hunt's attacks. But as I'd said to Jackson, that would eventually come. Once we'd eaten, Jackson set up the sensor alarm again. Then we climbed into bed, where he took me into his arms, kissed me tenderly, and held me as we both drifted into sleep. We were woken rather abruptly a few hours later by the sharp ringing of a phone. Jackson swore and flung out an arm, groping for the damn thing.
"Hello,"
he said as he squinted at the clock on the bedside table.
"Shit, it's 4 a.m. You better have a damn good excuse for calling, Turner."
My heart began to beat that little bit faster. If Sam was ringing, then something had happened. Something bad. I nudged Jackson with an elbow. "Put it on speaker." He did so.
"I know the fucking time," Sam said. "But I figured you'd like to know someone accessed our computers to run a trace on your phone." "How long ago?" "About an hour." "So why the fuck didn't you ring us sooner than this?" "Because it was only just discovered via the system security check," Sam snapped. "You're lucky to get any warning at all, because the checks were only implemented last night."
Meaning PIT did have a mole, just as we'd suspected.
"Do you know who it was?" "Yes, and she has already been apprehended. I just thought—"
He cut the rest of the sentence off as the perimeter alarm in the other room went off.
"What the fuck is that?" "Notice that we have company. Talk to you later, Turner."
Jackson hung up, then flung himself out of bed and grabbed his jeans.
"I'll take the front door."
I nodded, threw on a sweater, and ran for the adjoining door. But just as I got there, the damn thing was thrown open, smacking me in the face and sending me flying backward. I hit the floor hard, momentarily seeing stars as blood gushed down both my face and the back of my throat. I thrust out a hand, shooting fire at whoever was coming through that door, and then created a barrier between us. I didn't hear any screams, meaning my lance had missed its target. Nor did I hear the gunshot. I just saw something silver shoot through the flames and spear into the wall inches above my head. I threw myself sideways, and just in time, because 2 more bullets smacked into the floor where I'd been lying. Whoever was behind the gun wasn't mucking about. I became fire, scrambled upright, and moved to the door. The shooter was using the wall as a shield, but I could feel the heat of his body beyond it. I waited. A heartbeat later, he reappeared around the corner. Recognition stirred, but I shoved it aside and wrapped a fiery hand around his, wrenching the gun from his grip before he could fire again. He wasn't stupid. He turned and ran. I flipped the gun, retaining flesh on the hand holding it, and then fired. The bullet ripped through his thigh, and he came to a stumbling, crashing halt, a strangled sound wrenched from his throat as he wrapped his hands around his leg. Blood pulsed over his fingers and spurted onto the floor. I'd obviously hit an artery, meaning he'd bleed out in very quick time if he didn't get help soon. But he wasn't getting it from me. Not until the room was secure and I knew Jackson was safe. I became full flesh again and peered around the doorway. Jackson was battling 2 men, one of whom was on fire, but weirdly not screaming. A third was taking aim at Jackson's head. I raised the gun and fired. It wasn't a particularly good shot and didn't go anywhere near the guy I was aiming at, but at least it drew his attention away from Jackson and focused it on me. I flung myself back into the room. The bullet aimed at my head gouged into the doorframe, sending splinters flying. I took a deep breath, then rolled forward and flung fire at the felon. He swore and threw himself sideways, but my flames followed him, pinning his arm to his body before quickly wrapping him in a cocoon of flame. He screamed, even though they were cindering his clothes rather than his flesh. I threw him roughly against the wall and silenced him. I switched my focus to the man Jackson had set alight, catching his flames and dragging him away and down before pinning him to the floor. It gave Jackson the chance to concentrate on the other one, and in very little time, all four were under control.
"You okay?"
Jackson's gaze was sharp as it swept me. "Yeah." I carefully wiped a hand under my nose. Becoming fire had at least stopped the bleeding, but my face hurt like hell. "I am, however, seriously pissed off."
"That makes two of us."
Jackson stepped over the body of the man he'd knocked out, then bent and grabbed a fistful of the second man's shirt, hauling him roughly upright.
"You will talk, or I will ensure that it's your body that burns rather than just your clothes."
The man shook his head violently from side to side, and then raised a hand, urgently pointing at his throat. I frowned and stepped forward. "You can't speak?" He nodded and opened his mouth. No sound came out.
"Mute."
Jackson dropped him back to the carpet none too gently.
"Don't attack us, don't even twitch, or I will follow through with the threat."
He walked across to the felon bleeding out, and with a lance of fire cauterized the wound.
"Your turn. Speak or I will reopen that wound, and we both know that even a vampire can die if he loses enough blood."
The vampire licked his lips.
"What do you want to know?" "What do you think I want to know? Who the fuck sent you here?" "Ronaldo. He wanted you both out of the picture."
We might have guessed as much, but it was nice to get confirmation. And nice to know there wasn't someone else after us. At least not right now, anyway.
"And did he order the use of guns?"
The vamp nodded.
"He said you were too dangerous, that we needed to catch you both by surprise, and that guns were our best shot."
Jackson cast a grim look my way.
"Like we actually needed something else to be on the lookout for."
"Which is why we need to catch the bastard, or bastards first." I glanced down at the vampire. "Are you from DeLuca's den?" He frowned.
"No, and I wouldn't want to be either."
"Why?"
"The council has issued an erasure edict. If any of them had any sense, they'd be heading interstate rather than hanging about here."
Those in DeLuca's get didn't appear to be the brightest bulbs on the block, and I doubted any of them would be running, if only because they seemed to believe Ronaldo would be capable of protecting them. "So are you one of Ronaldo's den?" I asked. He shook his head.
"Subcontractor." "Who will in future," Jackson said, "not consider any offered action against us." "Too fucking right. There's not enough damn money in the world that could make me accept another commission like this." "Say that with a little more sincerity and I might just believe you."
Jackson's tone was dry.
"How did Ronaldo get in contact with you? Because he couldn't have gone through the coalition. Not enough time has passed between his decision to hunt us and your attack." "I've worked with him before."
"That's why you look familiar," I cut in. "You're one of the vamps who attacked Radcliffe's gaming venue." He stirred uneasily. Obviously, he thought his actions there had gone unnoticed in all the mayhem.
"All four of us were, but that wasn't our first job for him."
"I suggest it be your last. Not just because we'll kill you if we spot you again, but because Radcliffe very much intends revenge on all those involved."
"It was a commission, business, nothing more, nothing less. He, of all people, should understand that." "He's also a rat. They're very territorial, and Ronaldo, with your help, He is trying to take over their territory.
Jackson patted the vamp's arm, as if to comfort him.
If I were you, I'd take some of your own advice and get the hell out of this city until the dust clears. Except he can't, Sam said behind us. Because his ass will be locked up tight until he's tried for attempted murder.
I swung around, not bothering to hide my surprise. What the hell are you doing here?
What the fuck do you think I'm doing here?
He waved a hand.
You were under attack because Lydia accessed our computers.
Lydia? I cut in. Who's she?
The inspector's second. We won't know for sure, but given her state of confusion when we found her, it's pretty obvious she was under Ronaldo's control at the time. For how long that has been the case, and what operations have been compromised, are now the questions we need to answer.
You'd better warn whoever is minding her that Ronaldo has a thing for killing his pawns, rather than letting them speak.
We are well aware of that.
He paused.
Adam and several other PIT officers are on the way to take care of these four.
Huh, Jackson said.
It appears PIT values us far more than we figured. Of course, if you lot had actually taken our suspicions seriously a whole lot earlier, then we might not have gotten to this point. We are not fools, Sam bit back. And we are rigorous with our personnel checks.
But not rigorous enough, obviously. I paused. How exactly was she able to hack in and run a trace?
She didn't. As I said, she's the inspector's second, with full access to the system. She just wasn't told we'd installed the new security program.
He glanced around as Adam and another man entered.
You want to get this scum back to headquarters?
Adam nodded, and he and the other man immediately hauled the mute vampire to his feet and marched him out. Sam returned his gaze to us.
What were you doing at Rosen Pharmaceuticals this afternoon?
I raised an eyebrow. I thought you were no longer following us.
We're not. But we are keeping a watch on both Rosen Pharmaceuticals and Chase Medical Research Institute. Your arrival there was noted.
I guess we should have expected that. I told him why we'd gone there and then added, as it turns out, the number she had was for one James Hamberley, who worked at Holdright.
Hamberley? The Aswang victim?
And the man who was apparently blackmailing Rosen for several thousand a month in exchange for not releasing some seriously compromising photos of Junior with several other men.
Sam snorted. Considering the relationship between father and son, I'm surprised Senior didn't tell Hamberley to jump off the nearest bridge. Except that Senior saw the fact that his son was gay as something of a personal affront, Jackson said. And he would have seen the release of those photos as a smudge on his own reputation.
A phone rang in the other room. That's mine, I said, and headed in there. I had no idea who'd be ringing at this hour, but the mere fact someone was had trepidations skating up my spine. While the office phone had been diverted to the number, it was doubtful any of our clients would be ringing at 4 a.m. Aside from Rory, the only other person who had the number was Scott Baker. A call from either could only mean something had happened. Something bad. Thankfully, it wasn't Rory ringing to tell me there'd been another attempt on his life. Nor was it one of our clients. It was Baker. He didn't say hello, and he didn't apologize for ringing so late. He simply said,
"We've found Ronaldo."
Chapter 12. Just for a moment, surprise held me speechless. They'd tracked him down and hadn't yet attacked him? That alone spoke volumes, both about their determination to get him and their respect for him. Or, at least, respect for his abilities to manipulate and control people. How did you manage that?
The rats did, not me. They want you in on the action, but only if you agree not to inform PIT.
I blinked. Why? The only thing that really matters...
is the fact he killed our people," Baker cut in harshly. "And for that he must pay. A simple yes or no is all we need, Emberly."
Awareness itched at my back. I spun around and discovered Sam watching me from the doorway.
"Is there a problem?" he said.
I shook my head, then told Baker, "If that's the way you want it, sure." He gave me the address.
"Be there at sunrise."
I glanced at my watch. We had an hour, no more. "Will do." I hung up and threw the phone back into my purse. "Did you want something?" Sam eyed me somewhat suspiciously.
"I'm heading off with Adam. The inspector wants you and Jackson to come into headquarters, tomorrow if possible."
I frowned. "Why?"
"Probably to read you the riot act for misusing those badges she foolishly gave you."
Though his voice was flat, a hint of amusement touched the corners of his eyes. It warmed that stupid part deep inside of me, but I was getting rather good at ignoring that part these days. "Hey, it wasn't like we wanted the damn things, but you can hardly blame us for using them to our advantage." I paused. "You're not going to drug us again, are you?"
"I doubt it."
He eyed me uncertainly for a moment.
"Do we need to?"
"No, you most definitely do not. What we know, you know." And I resisted the urge to cross my fingers behind my back when I said that. Though his expression hadn't altered, it was very evident he didn't believe me.
"She wants you there at 9.
"We'll try, but we do have an agency to run."
"Is that what the phone call was about?"
"It's none of your damn business, but yes, it was."
"At this hour?"
His voice was skeptical. "Adultery has no time restrictions, Sam. You of all people should be aware of that. It's what you accused me of, after all." Which wasn't all fair, given he had every right to do so. Maybe if I'd explained what I was, and what that meant for him and me, things might have been different for us. But I couldn't change what I'd done. Not this time with this man. But the next rebirth, I was going to do as Rory suggested, and be honest. Hopefully the next man destined to capture my heart would be more accepting. And maybe, just maybe, I could live one lifetime happily in love. Sam didn't bite back, as much as I expected him to. His expression simply shut down, and that cloak of darkness swirled around him again. He didn't fade into the night, but he sure as hell electrified it. "And you might want to give us an address," I continued, "because we were blindfolded and thrown into the back of a van the last time we were there. Remember?" He gave me the address then, with a nod, turned and walked out. Jackson walked into the room, an eyebrow raised.
"I take it from his expression that the two of you had words."
"Yes. No." I waved a hand in frustration. That man just gets stranger and stranger. Maybe the virus has addled his brain.
"Maybe you should stop bringing up the past and concentrate on the future."
"Didn't I tell you to butt out of that part of my life?"
"And I told you that was impossible."
His grin was decidedly unrepentant.
"Who was on the phone?"
"Baker." I paused and motioned to the other room. "Are you sure they're gone?"
"Yep. Heard a van and a car start up. Why?"
"Because we have to get to Kayla Park stat." I grabbed my jeans and pulled them on. "They've found Ronaldo."
"And you didn't tell Sam that? Your ass is grass when he finds out."
I snorted. "Baker didn't give me an option. Either we do it his way or we miss out on the action."
"And that is something I've no intention of doing."
Jackson finished getting dressed.
"I take it the rats are involved in this showdown?"
"Yes. It was at their request that Baker rang us. No doubt in an effort to stave off any possible reprisals if this all goes ass up."
"Or because he wants our firepower as backup just to ensure the bastards don't get away again.
Jackson grunted and grabbed the keys.
Let's hope PIT isn't tailing us.
There's nothing we can do about it if it is. I followed him out the door. Oh, and Sam informed me that the chief inspector wants to see us at 9 tomorrow.
Does she now?
He climbed into the car, then said,
If we survive the upcoming encounter, I might just consider it. Or I might not. Depends on what she wants.
Apparently to castigate us over our usage of the badges.
Hey, she's more than welcome to have them back.
He motioned to the GPS.
You want to type in where we have to go?
I did so. What do we have in the way of weapons? He gave me the raised eyebrows, did you really just say that sort of look.
Fire isn't enough for you these days.
When we don't know who or what we're dealing with beyond Ronaldo, no, it's not, I said. He won't be alone. Not after that near miss at the warehouse. Hell, for all we know, the rats suddenly locating him is nothing more than a setup. Besides, that instinctive part of me was suggesting I'd have to reserve every scrap of fire I had if I wanted us to get through this. Not something I was about to ignore.
I'm sure Radcliffe and Baker will be more than aware of that prospect,
Jackson said. I hoped so, because otherwise it could get ugly. It didn't take us long to reach Kayla Park. Jackson turned off the headlights as we cruised into Lambic Drive and headed for the cafe about midway down. Baker stepped out of the shadows as we pulled into one of the parking spots in front of the place. I climbed out of the SUV and closed the door as softly as I could. Where's Radcliffe? I asked him.
At the location, keeping an eye on things. Between my men and the rats, we've got the building surrounded.
I frowned. Frederick's a vampire. He's going to sense the heartbeats.
We're well aware of that, and we are currently out of sensing distance, Baker said. And you're sure this isn't a trap?
Jackson moved around to the rear of the SUV and retrieved a number of guns from the trunk. He handed me one and kept the other two, plus a knife for himself.
No, we're not, Baker said. But he's definitely inside.
Meaning just one of the twins is inside?
That is something we're unsure of. We think both are in there, but we haven't sighted the second brother. I guess that would be hard to confirm since they appear to be in the habit of wearing identical clothes, Jackson said. What do you want us to do? We're going in through the front door. Radcliffe is looking after the rear and the sewers. We want you to handle the roof access.
I raised my eyebrows. How many stories does this place have?
3 in the office section. The warehouse is an unknown at this stage, but there's no roof exit there from what we can see. So we're nothing more than backup, Jackson said. Because I'm seriously not happy about that. You're not the only one who lost someone, Baker, and I have no intention of being sidelined on this. You're not. There's no way in hell Ronaldo would trap himself inside any building without having an escape route ready, Baker said. Something you learned the hard way at the previous warehouse. Not the same thing. He was gone before we got there, Jackson bit back. And you have no guarantee the same thing hasn't happened here. Yeah, we have. Because we've been watching all the exits for several hours now. Not just the building's exits, but all sewer outlets and the roof. One of the Ronaldos went in. No one has come out. Then don't expect me to sit on that roof and wait for one of them to head my way, Jackson said. Because it's not going to happen. Nor do I want that. The plan is to attack from all possible angles. Hopefully we'll trap the bastard somewhere in the middle of us all.
He glanced at his watch.
You have 18 minutes to get in place. And how do you expect us to get onto the roof without Ronaldo or anyone else spotting us? Jackson said. You won't. But that's the whole point. While they're readying for an attack from above, we'll hit them from the sides.
He pulled a roughly drawn map out of his pocket and placed it on the hood of the SUV.
This is our target building here. On the corner of Lambert and this street, there are several large trees that reach past roof height. It should be easy enough to shimmy up them and drop onto the roof.
Do I look like the type that shimmies up trees to you? I asked mildly.
I don't know about trees, but Radcliffe's told me you do a rather mean fire shimmy.
His grin flashed.
And he's had first-hand experience, apparently.
That he did.
We do have people watching the roof, Baker continued. Just in case the bastards attempt an escape before you get up there. Nothing personal, Baker, Jackson said. But I really hope the bastard does head our way. I want to watch his face as I pound every ounce of life from his body.
Baker raised his eyebrows.
I had no idea Faye could be so damn brutal.
Jackson's grin flashed, but it was a dangerous thing.
That's because most people are sensible enough not to get on our bad side. We are called Dark Fae for a reason, you know. I guess so.
Baker folded up his map and shoved it back into his pocket.
0 hour is 6 on the dot. Time now is 5:45.
We adjusted our watches to match his, and then all headed down the street, keeping on the opposite side from our target building in an effort to stop any vamp guards from sensing our heartbeats. But vamps were blessed with night sight that was very similar to infrared, so even if they couldn't hear the pulse of life through our bodies, they'd almost certainly see us, darkness or not, if they happened to be looking our way. And I was damn sure that after Ronaldo's previous close call, he wouldn't be foolish enough to camp somewhere without guards. Tension crawled through me. I flexed my fingers, but I couldn't quite ignore the growing certainty that this was a trap, and one that was going to go to hell in a handbasket all too soon. Baker crossed the road and disappeared into the shadows of the building next to our target. Jackson and I continued on, crossing over a grassy divide before slipping into the parking lot of the building on the other side of the road. There were several cars and a van parked there. We used the van as cover. I pressed back against the van, then carefully peered around its side. Our target building was T-shaped, with the 3-story office portion being the top piece to the warehouse's stem. The office section was a long 3-story concrete and glass building. There were no lights shining in any of the windows, and no sign of anyone either around the perimeter or on the roof. I couldn't even see the rats or the wolves. I really don't like the feel of this, Jackson, I thought.
No.
He paused.
But if Ronaldo is inside, and Baker saw him go in, then fuck the trap. This might be our one and only chance to grab the bastards, and I'm not going to step away from it.
Neither was I, even if that precognitive part of me was beginning to whisper all sorts of dire consequences if we didn't. Of course, that could have been fueled by fear, by the knowledge that Ronaldo was never going to go down without causing as much mayhem and carnage as possible. He had the vamps in there to do it, but my real concern was what else and whom else did he have? My gaze drifted to the empty building behind us. Intuition stirred, but it gave me squat as to why. There was no sign of movement, no sense of heat coming from within. The place was empty, and yet... I frowned and glanced at my watch. 3 minutes to go. I returned my attention back to our target building. I wonder why they chose 6 o'clock as an attack time. Hanging about here is only increasing the chances of discovery, I thought. Jackson pointed skyward. Faint drifts of pink and gold were beginning to touch the black.
I suspect it has something to do with the sunrise. Vamps are sluggish in the brief time between night and sunset, or sunrise.
Jackson thought. I snorted. Says who? Certainly no vampire I've ever come across has exhibited said sluggishness during those times.
It's a common belief.
Just like the belief that all Fae are small and winged, I thought. His grin flashed.
Humans have always gotten fairies and fae mixed up.
I've never seen a fairy, not in all the long years I've been alive.
Sure you have. They're those small yellow flowering weeds that form a white parachute-like seed pod.
I lightly slapped his arm. Idiot. He glanced down at his watch, and his amusement flared.
Time to go.
I hope the rats and the wolves don't waste too much time attacking. I slipped around the corner of the van and ran toward the nearest climbable tree. And I seriously hope we're not being hung out to dry here.
Baker wouldn't. He wants revenge too badly.
I agree, but Radcliffe is also involved, and he certainly would.
We're less a threat to him than Ronaldo. He needs to take that bastard down and regain the respect of his mischief, he thought.
A smile touched my lips. I always found that to be a rather incongruous name for a group of rats. We reached the tree. I lifted one leg so Jackson could boost me up, then grabbed the nearest branch and climbed onto it. The old eucalyptus had obviously been here even before the area had become an industrial estate, and the thick branches were very easy to climb. I reached the one that stretched out over the building's rooftop and made my way down its length. In very little time I was on the roof, my fingers lightly brushing the concrete as I steadied myself. Jackson joined me a few seconds later.
Where the fuck is the attack from the...
He cut the question off as a gigantic whoosh of debris and heat came from the front of the building.
About time. Let's find the exit.
We padded through the sea of cooling towers, antennas, and other paraphernalia, eventually finding a stairwell entrance toward the rear of the building, to the right of the edge where the warehouse met the office portion. Jackson tested the handle. Unsurprisingly, it was locked, but a quick burst of fire soon fixed that. He opened the door carefully. Darkness greeted us, but not silence. All hell had broken loose somewhere down below. He opened the door wider and peered inside. No fist or gunshot greeted him, so he moved farther into the stairwell. I followed, but paused at the edge of the railing and peered down into the darkness. The ongoing noise of the battle below was all-encompassing, but I nevertheless had the vague suspicion someone was headed our way. Jackson got out one of his guns and flicked the safety off. I did the same. My fire might be my best weapon, but that earlier intuition about reserving my fire was getting stronger. And I really, really didn't want to know the reason behind it. I might just run if I did. We edged carefully down the stairs, keeping our backs to the wall, and our guns trained on the stairs below. The sensation that we weren't alone was growing, but I couldn't hear any breathing or steps.
Could be vamps,
Jackson thought. Possibly. But even if they'd wrapped the shadows around their bodies, that wouldn't explain why I couldn't hear their steps.
If Ronaldo has been hiring from the Coalition, it's possible he's gotten a few ex-military types, Jackson thought. Could explain the lack of noise.
We reached the next landing and the door to the third floor. I glanced down, the hairs at the back of my neck rising. Whatever was down there, that instinctive part of me did not like it. Do you want to check this level while I keep an eye on the stairwell? I thought. He hesitated.
I'm not entirely sure it's a good idea to split up, he thought.
It's not like we have any other option. We can't risk whoever's below getting past us. His frustration slipped through me, but I was right and he knew it.
Shout if you need help.
As long as you remember to do the same.
Always.
He opened the door and silently slipped through. I caught the edge of the door to stop it from closing again. Jackson made no sound as he disappeared down the hall, but I could tell his location by the whereabouts of his body heat. I wished I could do the same with whoever was creeping up from below. They were still weirdly quiet, and I was getting very little in the way of heat, which meant that either they didn't have any, and even vampires had detectable body heat, even if it was lower than that of a human, or there was some kind of magic involved. If it was the latter, it might just be Ronaldo. Who else would bother? I flexed my free hand. Heat burned at my fingertips, but it wasn't showing. Not yet, anyway. From down the far end of the hallway came an odd scrape of sound, almost like a body hitting the ground. Unease flicked through me. Jackson? I thought. He didn't respond. The unease sharpened. Damn it, Jackson, don't play games. Answer me, I thought. Still no response. Fuck. I thrust a hand through my hair, then glanced down the stairs again, as the sense of something approaching also sharpened. I took a deep breath, then released the heat burning at my fingertips and flung it up the stairs, creating a thick, fiery barrier only the foolish would attempt to get through. It also had a secondary benefit. If someone were foolish enough, I'd know about it. I cast another look down the stairs, but even though my fire had burned away the shadows, it still didn't reveal the threat I was sensing. I spun and raced down the hallway, my gaze sweeping each office as I passed, but there was nothing more than basic furniture and dust. This floor obviously hadn't been used in a while. Behind me, the stairwell door shut with a soft clang, the sound echoing ominously across the shadows. I reached the end of the building, but there was no Jackson, and no sign of where he might have gone. Fear swirled through me, but I clamped down on it. If he were dead, I'd know about it. I'd feel the emptiness in that part of my brain that could hear his thoughts and emotions. That part might be silent, but it wasn't severed. He was alive, but unconscious. But who the fuck had attacked him? And where the hell had they gone? Though dawn was rapidly gaining accession over the night outside, darkness still reigned supreme inside. I cast a small ball of fire into the air, then glanced back down the hall. The door was still closed, and no one had made an attempt to get through my flames. And yet something had changed. The air felt different. Alive. I frowned, studying the doorway for a second longer, before pulling my gaze back to my immediate surroundings. And that was when I spotted it. Blood. My gut twisted as I strode over and bent down. It was fresh. Jackson's, that inner voice whispered. I closed my eyes and tried to remain calm. He's hurt, not dead. Hold on to that and just find him. As I rose, I spotted another droplet of blood, then another. The minuscule trail led me directly to a blank wall. Or was it? I ran my hand along the plaster and felt a slight indent. I pressed it, and the wall to my right slid aside, revealing a dark, square space and cables that ran down into a deeper darkness. A dumbwaiter, I presumed. I leaned forward a little, but as I did, that sense of wrongness sharpened abruptly. I threw myself sideways, hitting the carpet with a grunt, but somehow managing to keep hold of my gun. I raised it, my finger on the trigger, but there was nothing there. Was there? I narrowed my gaze and saw it, the faintest shimmer of air. Someone was there, all right. They were just using a glamour, and not the type that altered their form, but rather one that hid it completely. I pulled the trigger. The shot rang out like the boom of a cannon, but whoever was behind the glamour was quicker than a rattlesnake. A body hit the ground to my left, the sound almost, but not quite, smothered. I fired again. This time there was a grunt as the bullet hit home. I scrambled to my feet, only to be knocked down again as my unseen assailant threw himself at me. As we went down in a tangle of arms and legs, he reached for the gun, trying to tear it from my grip. I swore and became flame, and he screamed as his body went up in the whoosh of fire. I clenched a fist, made it flesh again, and smashed it into his jaw as hard as I could. As he went limp, I threw him from me, then recalled my flames and fully regained human form. only to realize there'd been 2 of them. Something smashed against the back of my head and sent me flying. I hit the wall hard and felt the black tide of unconsciousness descending. I fought it with every scrap of energy and determination I had in me, and punched upward with my free hand. I didn't hit anything, but it didn't matter because I wasn't actually trying to. Multiple fingers of flame leapt from my clenched fingers and fanned out, searching for my attacker. There was a soft curse and the faintest sound of footfalls, but there was no escape from my net. It caught him, wrapped around him, and then flung him hard against the nearest wall. He didn't move. I released the flames and let their energy filter back into me as I forced myself into a sitting position. Bile rose up my throat, and again the tide of black threatened. I sucked in air, drawing it deep into my lungs, into my body, trying to calm the churning in my gut and the weakness washing through my body. It was a weakness that could affect my ability to raise fire as a weapon, and was undoubtedly why intuition had been warning me to conserve it. After several minutes, the tide receded. I pushed upright. The effort made my head pound, and warmth began to trickle down the back of my neck. I tucked the gun into the back of my jeans, then carefully felt the back of my head. Not only was there a lump the size of a tennis ball, but also a cut at least an inch long. I briefly became flame to cauterize the wound, but the effort had my senses swimming. Concussion, I suspected. I walked across to my first attacker, whose position I knew only thanks to the smell of burned flesh, and carefully knelt beside him. Glamours might be capable of hiding your form, but they didn't actually stop anyone from feeling you. There was a slight tingle as I pressed my hands through the glamour's barrier, but it quickly faded as I began searching for whatever artifact the spell had been placed on. I found it around his neck, a pendant on a simple chain from the feel of it. I yanked on the chain to break it, and then flung both it and the pendant away from him. The air around his body shimmered as the spell faded, revealing a big red-haired man in his late 40s. He wasn't a vamp. His skin was too tanned, and he wasn't a wolf. He was human. A hulking great human. He needed to be if they'd shoved Jackson into the dumbwaiter. Jackson was neither small nor light. I pushed up and went into the nearest office, rummaging around until I found some wrapping tape. Then I rolled the Hulk onto his stomach, hauled his arms behind his back, and wrapped the tape thickly around his wrists and hands. I repeated the process with his feet. With that one safe, I walked down to the other one, pausing on the way there to stomp on the small plaster pendant. It shattered with a small puff of smoke. I reached inside the glamour hiding my second attacker, and felt around until I found the pendant, discovering that this one was a female, not a male. This time I undid the chain rather than break it, and didn't toss it away. Instead I placed it on my hand, and after a minute felt my skin tingle as the magic within it reactivated, and my hand, arm, and no doubt the rest of me disappeared. As I'd suspected, these glamours were activated by skin contact, and had not been specifically designed for either of my attackers. I slipped the pendant around my neck and let it sit next to the charm Grace had given us. Once I'd repeated the tying up process, I rose and went back to the dumbwaiter. The thing was on the move. I stepped back and waited. It rose with torturous slowness. Sweat trickled down my back. My head was still pounding, and all I wanted to do was find a nice, dark corner to curl up in. But not until Jackson was safe, and the 2 Ronaldos were dead. The top of the dumbwaiter came into view. Fire boiled through me, wanting release, wanting to lash out and hurt someone. But there was no one in the dumbwaiter to hurt. There was just a note. I released the breath I hadn't been aware I was holding, and carefully stepped forward. Grace's charm flared to life almost instantly, and I stopped. Obviously the magic was meant to ensnare me the minute I picked up the note, so that was the one thing I couldn't do. I rose on my tiptoes in an effort to see what was written on it, but from this distance it was little more than elegant-looking black scrawls. Ronaldo's writing, I guessed. He, or at least the one we'd met, seemed the elegant type. I quickly looked around and spotted one of those sticks used to open and close vents sitting in the room I'd gotten the tape from. I retrieved it, then carefully stretched out and tried to snag the note and drag it closer. The burn of the charm at my neck got stronger. Then it snapped away, and the note fluttered free from the dumbwaiter. I dropped the stick and picked up the note. "If you want to see him alive," it said, "come to the factory across the road, the one that holds the van you hid behind. And don't inform the rats or the wolves." Intuition had been right. It was my senses that had let me down. A wild mix of fury and fear rushed through me, and the note became cinders in an instant. As its sooty remains drifted to the floor, I spun and walked back to the staircase. It was a trap, I knew that. But I had Grace's charm, I had the glamour, and I had my rage. It would have to be enough. I thrust a hand to open the door, then stopped. Whoever I'd sensed coming up the stairwell earlier was now waiting just beyond the door. I took a deep breath, then raised a hand, caught my barrier's flames and smeared them across the entire stairwell. That was when the screams began. Horrible, pain-filled screams. Good, that hard part of me thought. I thrust the door open and was greeted by a human torch. I grabbed my gun and shot at what looked like a kneecap. As the man went down, I snatched the fire back into my body, then spun and ran up the stairs. The sound of fighting was still rising from below, suggesting Ronaldo had one hell of an army down there. Maybe even the entirety of DeLuca's den. After all, with the Council's kill order now hanging over their collective heads, they had nothing to lose and everything to gain by fighting for Ronaldo. I pushed out onto the rooftop. The sky was a wild mix of red, orange, gold, and purple, and it seemed to echo the state of my mind. I flexed my fingers as I strode across the roof, but paused near the edge, my gaze scanning the building on the other side of the street. The front door was now open. It was an invitation I wasn't about to accept. I glanced up at the tree, took a deep breath that didn't do a whole lot to ease the pounding in my head, and leapt. I caught the branch with one hand, steadied myself with the other, and then clambered up. It didn't take me long to get down to the ground. I took a circular route to the other building. I had no idea who might be watching, but I had no doubt someone was. I just had to hope that whoever it was wasn't all that familiar with magic and glamours. The building belonged to some sort of printing press, and it was another of those two-story concrete and glass constructions that could be found everywhere in industrial estates like this. There was a driveway between this building and the next, and that was where I headed. I still wasn't getting any sense of heat coming from within the building, but as I walked down to the loading bay area, the awareness of it slipped across my senses. I slowed my steps, trying to keep as quiet as possible. While I was pretty confident no one could see through the glamour, I had no idea who or what was up ahead, although if they were vampires, they'd sense my heartbeat, glamour or not. I stepped into the loading bay. There were two of them there, one at the top of the steps near the door, the other at the bottom of the ramp. If I didn't want Ronaldo to know I was coming in from the side entrance, I had to take both out at the same time, and that meant using fire. Trouble was, I wasn't entirely sure how much more fire I had in me. As intuition had warned, the pounding in my head was sapping all my strength. But it wasn't like I had any other option. If I only attacked one, the other would have the chance to warn Ronaldo. Besides, time was running out, for Jackson and for me. Not wanting to think too hard about that bit of information, I picked up a pebble and flung it against the opposite wall. As the two men spun around, I flicked out 2 ribbons of fire, wrapped one around each, and threw them headfirst into the walls. I didn't bother checking them. The blood beginning to stain the concrete spoke volumes about their life expectancy. I ran up the steps and carefully opened the door. The room beyond was small and dark, some sort of office or receiving area. I crept forward. There was a window next to the door, and I peered through it from one side. With dawn in full bloom outside, the shadows were lifting inside. The room beyond was vast and filled with printing presses and various other bits of machinery. I couldn't see anyone, and there was no indication of a heat source anywhere in the room. Beyond the presses were several doors. One was open and led into a bathroom. The other was closed. I carefully opened the door and walked out, keeping my back to the external wall in an effort to protect myself. I still wasn't sensing anyone, but then I hadn't sensed the red-haired Hulk and his companion until it was almost too late either. I should have drained the heat from them. It would have bolstered my strength and shored up my reserves, but it was too late for regrets now. It didn't take me long to reach the closed door, but I didn't reach for the handle. Instead, I pressed a hand against the wood, then closed my eyes and called to whatever heat was inside. Something every phoenix could do, but rarely attempted, as it drained our strength even as it fed us. Which was why we generally touched people when we fed from them. It was easier and far less dangerous. Doing this now, when I was in an already depleted state, was doubly so. There was heat inside. It filtered quickly through my fingertips and fed the inner flames. But my head began to pound even more viciously, and my form flickered, briefly becoming fire, a sure sign I was reaching my body's limits. 2 soft thuds came from inside. I quickly shut down the feed, but didn't immediately move, waiting instead for the flickering between shapes to ease. Once I grabbed the handle and opened the door. The room beyond was an open office area. One guard lay to the right of the door, and another across the exit on the far side of the room. I knelt down beside the nearest guard, a vampire, and one I'd seen before. He was one of the vamps who'd attacked Sam and me in the cemetery. Obviously, no lesson had been learned, or warning heeded. Not then, not later. I placed a hand on his and drew every scrap of heat and life he had left in him into my body. His skin went cold, and then his body began to draw in on itself, until there was nothing left but flesh on bone, and life had departed. It helped, only fractionally, but I suspected even the smallest of fractions would matter. I repeated the process with the second guard, another of DeLuca's get, then placed my hand on the door. There was no sense of heat coming from the next room. I went through. It appeared to be some sort of conference area. I stepped toward the next door, only to halt as a somewhat tinny, but all too familiar voice said, "I suggest you stop all the fucking about and come to me immediately if you wish your partner to remain alive." Fire swelled around me, a halo of flame that had nowhere and no one to immediately attack. I glanced around the room and saw the speaker sitting in the far corner. "I know you're in the building, Emberly. I can feel the pulse of your life in the room below." Meaning he was above. I looked up. The ceiling was one of those suspended grid systems that were easy to get into. The concrete above it wouldn't be, unless I could find a way to circumvent it. The bathroom. I spun around and walked out. "Hurry up, dear Emberly. Otherwise your partner will pay the price." I didn't respond, as much as I wanted to. I strode into the bathroom, punched a hole into the wall behind the nearest toilet, and found the waste pipe. Places like this usually had their bathroom facilities situated in the same location on every floor, to make connections for waste and water easier. This place was no different. If Ronaldo wanted me, he was going to get me. The real me, in all my fiery glory. I blasted a hole into the plastic pipe, then shifted shape and surged upward. The facilities above provided as little resistance to my heat as the ones below, and in very little time I was out the door and in the main room. Men flung themselves at me, not seeming to care that I was fire. Their bodies went up the instant they touched me. 2, 3, and then more hit me, momentarily forcing me down under the sheer force of their numbers. But as their bodies became ash, that force lifted and I surged forward again. Ronaldo was standing alone in the middle of a large stone circle. Witch stones, not ordinary ones. To one side of him, surrounded by at least a dozen vampires, knelt Jackson. His hands were tied, and around his neck was a silvery pendant, not unlike the one I'd stolen. I had no doubt it was restraining his fire, just as I had no doubt that all the pendants had come from the small woman kneeling beside him. Even from where I was, I could feel the wash of her power. But both she and that power were under Ronaldo's control, if her slack features and the emptiness in her eyes were anything to go by. Ronaldo himself looked calm, but fury radiated from his body, its force so fierce the air around him seemed to boil. I shot a lance of fire his way, even though the stones around him told me it was pointless. It bounced harmlessly away. I sent another one at one of the stones, but lessons had obviously been learned, because it too bounced away. As a last resort, I tried to call to his body heat. That too proved useless. The wall of magic surrounding him had been very well designed. He smiled. It was not a pleasant thing to behold.
"Retain your real form, Emberly, or the witch dies."
If Ronaldo thought my flesh form rather than this was real, then perhaps he didn't know as much about phoenixes as he thought. It at least gave me some hope. My gaze met Jackson's as I shifted shape. "You okay?" I thought. He didn't look it. His skin was grey, and sweat was trickling down the side of his face.
"Some gorilla broke my leg, and the witch's charm is restricting my fire. But other than that, just ducky," he thought. "Step into my circle, Emberly," said the spider to the fly.
I flexed my fingers, then walked forward. "Do you know what the circle around him is?" I thought.
"It's not only fire restriction, but it'll restrict your access to the mother," Jackson thought.
Meaning the witch was familiar with the mother, and that she was probably the reason Frederick's spell had been as well designed as it was. But I'd beaten him, and I could beat this witch, if I had the energy, not to mention the time.
"I was going to kill you swiftly," Ronaldo continued. "But I'm afraid that option disappeared after what you did to my brother."
"I haven't fucking touched your brother." I paused. Did he mean in the stairwell? The one I'd set alight and then shot?
"I can feel his agony, Emberly. It burns through my body and my brain and begs me to return it in kind."
Ronaldo waved a hand.
"I cannot help but comply."
Meaning I'd had him. I'd had the bastard screaming at my feet, and in my anxiety to get to Jackson, I'd let him live. Fuck.
"I would have done the same," Jackson thought.
That's not overly comforting right now, I thought. I stopped a few paces outside the stone circle. "Will your broken leg prevent you taking out the guards?"
"It prevents me from moving, but if I can access my fire, I can take the guards out no problem."
He paused.
"But the minute I attempt it, the witch is dead."
"I'm about to fix that problem." To Ronaldo I said, "Release your grip on the witch before I step into your circle." He raised an eyebrow.
"If you hope that she might help you with her magic, you will be disappointed. Among the charms she created for me was one that restricts any access she has to magic.
Release her and you can have me. Don't, and I'll kill your guards, free Jackson, and leave you surrounded in a ring of fire your witch won't be able to tame and you won't get through. To Jackson I added, don't react, not in any way. With that I called to the mother. She answered swiftly and with such force that my entire body trembled. I licked my lips and flicked an invisible sliver toward Jackson, even as I let her energy dance across my fingertips to ensure Ronaldo's attention remained on me. And then, I added, I'll go find your bastard brother and finish what I started. I'm sure he couldn't have crawled too far from where I left him. The pendant disappeared in a puff of smoke, even as Ronaldo's face twisted, and he took an involuntary step forward. Then he stopped and took a deep breath. But there was madness in his eyes now. Madness and pain. It was both his and his brother's, I suspected.
I will very much enjoy tearing you apart, piece by tiny piece.
As he spoke, the witch took a shuddering breath, then glanced around wildly. Where am I? What's happening? You are under the thrall of a vampire, I said, keeping my gaze on said vampire, and have just been released. Stay calm and don't move, or his guards will kill you. Oh my God!
It's okay, Jackson murmured. Everything will be okay. No, it won't, Ronaldo said, then motioned me forward with his fingers equipped with nails that were unusually long and razor-sharp. He really was going to tear me apart. Come along, Emberly. I haven't all day.
I kept a grip of the mother and took those final few steps. The magic hit me like a club, ripping apart my hold on the mother and sending my senses reeling. I felt, rather than heard, his approach and threw myself sideways. I hit the ground hard but rolled to my feet, only to be knocked backward by a blow to the side of my face. I swore, fighting tears and pain, but somehow twisted around and lashed out with a booted foot. It connected with flesh, but was met with a laugh.
Is that the best you can do without your fire, Emberly? I'm disappointed.
I blinked, watching him fade in and out of existence, and wasn't sure if it was him or me. He ran at me again. I dodged, but at the last moment he dropped and swept my feet out from underneath me. I somehow twisted as I was going down, landing on hands and knees, and scrambling away. He didn't pursue me. He simply waited. I stood up. He came at me again. Again I dodged. The blow aimed at my face tore down my side, shredding my shirt and slashing into my skin. Distantly I became aware of fighting, of shouting, and knew Jackson was battling the guards. But he was heavily outnumbered, even with his fire, and was no immediate help to me.
I can smell your blood, Ronaldo said softly. And its scent is sweet. Perhaps I should taste it before I kill you.
Confidence always comes before a fall, Ronaldo, I said. And your fall is going to be spectacular.
We both know that is a threat you cannot back up.
He charged me. I spun away, but he caught my arm, then kicked my legs out from under me. My back hit the ground, and something hard dug into my back. The gun. I still had the fucking gun. But before I could reach for it, he was on me, his weight pinning me. I tried to buck him off, but he was too heavy. I tried hitting him, punching him, clawing him, but he merely smiled and caught my arms, holding them away from him.
Checkmate, I believe, he said,
and then bent down to feed from me. I screamed in horror, screamed in pain, but I couldn't move, couldn't do anything, as he drained the life from me.
Emberly!
Jackson's urgent thought bit through my panic.
Use me! What? Use our connection. Draw my fire. The stones will stop it. The witch said they won't. Try. Or die. He didn't actually say that last bit, but it was in his thoughts nevertheless. I drew in a shuddering breath, feeling my strength slipping away even as I did so. It was now or never. And I had no idea how to do it. Imagine our connection as a tunnel. Reach down through it, he thought. I closed my eyes, did as he suggested. Then reached, as I'd remotely reached for the life of the vampires earlier. There was a brief moment of blackness and disorientation. Then I felt it. Felt his fire and his life, his fury and his fear. But I didn't reach for it. Instead, I reached through him to the mother and called to her. She came. I grabbed her energy with two metaphysical fists and then projected outward, through me and into Ronaldo. The force of it was so strong, it tore him from my neck and threw him across the room. He didn't immediately move, but he lived, even if his entire body was smoking. I pushed myself onto my hands and knees, sucked in air as my head swam and blood rushed down my neck, then forced myself onto my feet and drew the gun. "Die, you bastard," I said, and pulled the trigger. And kept pulling until the clip was empty and there was nothing left of his head. Then the gun slipped from my fingers and I dropped to my knees. Someone dropped beside me. Then warm fingers grabbed mine. "Feed from me, Phoenix. There is still one brother left." "The witch," some part of me whispered. I licked my lip and tried to ignore the siren call of her body's heat. "It would be dangerous for me to even attempt that. I might kill you." "I'd be dead if not for you," she said. "But even so, I trust that you will not. It is not within you to kill another that way. If only you knew." "Do it," she said. "Now." Please," Jackson thought. I closed my eyes, closed my fingers around hers, and fed. It flowed through me, a molten river that chased the ice from my veins and the weakness from my limbs. It would have been easy, so easy to keep the connection, to drain her completely. But her words seemed to echo through her brain. I forced my grip to open, and I released her hand. Her whole body slumped. "Go," was all she said. "Hit the bastard for me before you cinder him," Jackson thought. I became fire and swirled out of the building, and back to the rooftop. I shifted shape again, then opened the door and ran down the stairs. But Ronaldo's twin wasn't there. I swore, ran down the rest of the stairs, and thrust the door open. A dozen men immediately swung around. I held up my hands, my gaze searching for, and then finding Baker. "Did you retrieve Ronaldo from the stairwell?" "No, we did not," Radcliffe said, stepping up beside Baker. "You were supposed to handle anyone attempting to escape via the stairwell." I swore again and thrust a hand through my hair. "Don't give me any of your shit, Radcliffe, because I'm really not in the mood. I've killed one of the twins. The other has burns over most of his body and a smashed kneecap. How about you putting some rats to good use and hunt him down? He can't have gotten far." But even as Radcliffe snapped his fingers and the rats disappeared, intuition whispered of chances missed. The second brother had escaped us. Chapter 13. "You want anything from the cafe?" I asked Rory, sticking my head around the door into his bedroom. We both moved back home a week earlier, and though he still wasn't able to return to work, I suspected it wouldn't be much longer before he did. His skin glowed with renewed health and vitality,
and he was getting through a full day now without having to nap.
A coffee and a bagel would be good.
He glanced at his watch.
Aren't you up a little early for a Saturday?
Tell that to my stomach. It's the one grumbling so loud I had no choice but to get up. I might have outwardly recovered from the injuries I'd received during our semi-successful attempt to neutralize Ronaldo, but my body continued to demand calories and fire, suggesting it might take a while yet before I was fully back to normal. Especially since I dared not draw too much from Rory until he was back to full strength. Besides, I've got that damn meeting with the inspector this morning.
You? Jackson's not invited?
I'm sure he wants to be there, but he's got strict orders to remain in bed and give his leg a full chance to heal.
Rory snorted. Yeah, like that's going to happen.
It will. I called in someone to make sure he did.
If it's a female someone, you know how that's going to end.
Makani is wise to his ways. Trust me, until he's more mobile, he won't get anywhere with her.
Makani? Why don't I know this Wonder Woman?
She's the airfare who gave us the SUV to use.
I think she and I need to meet.
I snorted. You must be feeling a whole lot better if you're thinking about future seduction possibilities.
Oh, I am.
His grin flashed.
Do you know what the inspector wants?
Probably to berate me for incorrect use of the badges and for letting the other brother escape.
That was hardly your fault. You weren't to know who he was.
I should have checked, Rory. I had him and I let him go.
He couldn't have crawled out of that stairwell without help. Not in the state he was in.
I know. It doesn't alter the fact that he did escape. And while it was somewhat comforting to know that, with the severity of his wounds, and the fact we'd decimated his forces, he'd be incapable of any sort of revenge for a while yet, that didn't mean it wouldn't come. We weren't out of the woods yet. Not by a long shot. I pushed away from the door.
Just the coffee and croissant. Bagel, not croissant.
Oh, right. I grabbed my purse from the coffee table and slung it over my shoulder as I headed downstairs. Though it was still only early morning, the light shining through the foyer's glass was bright enough for me to spot the figure waiting for me near the exit. Sam. I stopped abruptly. What are you doing here? He peeled away from the wall he'd been leaning against, but didn't move toward me.
We need to talk.
I'm due in at your office this morning. We can talk then. A smile touched his lips, and though it was little more than a ghost of the ones that I'd seen so often in the past, it nevertheless affected me as strongly as ever.
No, we can't. Because that's business, and this is about us.
I thrust my hands deeper into my coat pocket. There is no us, Sam. We were over a long time ago.
I know.
He waved a hand toward Portside, the cafe just up the road and the place I'd been heading for the bagels.
Shall we take this discussion to a more comfortable location?
There's no point.
I know, but humour me all the same. I have something that needs to be said.
What if I don't want to hear it?
I'll keep pestering you until you do. Ultimately, it would be simpler and easier to just listen now.
Fine, I muttered and stalked past him. The morning air was crisp, but I was too aware of the man at my back to feel it. I selected a table away from the other patrons and sat down. He slid out the chair opposite. What do you want to say? My voice was flat, almost harsh. He didn't immediately answer. Instead, he smiled at the waitress as she appeared at our table, and he ordered a coffee. I ordered drinks and bagels for both Rory and myself. You have until that order gets back, I said. Then I'm leaving.
Fine.
He laced his fingers together and leaned forward.
What I attempted to say in Brooklyn, and what you obviously took the wrong way, is that I can't have any relationship until I know, one way or another, What is going to happen to me with this virus in my blood?
I blinked. You were having a relationship with Rochelle, weren't you?
And you're well aware that she was similarly infected.
His smile was tight.
I may not be a saint, but I'm certainly not a monk. Although I'll probably have to become one now that she's dead.
So why are you telling me this? We're over, Sam.
Possibly.
Possibly? Annoyance surged, and I thrust forward, my grip on the table suddenly fierce. It's a fact of every Phoenix's love life that the person they love will ultimately hurt or destroy them. We never get a happy ending. Do you get that? Never. So as much as you might now want otherwise, for whatever fucking reason, it's not going to happen. It can't happen. I paused, took a deep breath, and then leaned back. And oddly felt better for unleashing all that. He frowned.
What do you mean, never?
It means, in all the centuries I've been alive, in all the centuries Rory's been alive, we've never found lasting love. Something always happens to shatter it.
Something like me finding out about you and Rory?
Yeah. I scrubbed a hand across my eyes. And I probably should have told you about him, but your attitude to supernaturals and past history stopped me. Rebirth after being murdered is never a fun thing, let me tell you. His face paled.
No matter how angry I might have been, I would have never...
I know, but past loves have. I sighed. None of which alters the fact that you and I cannot, will not happen in this lifetime. He studied me silently for a moment, and then sat back.
I'm sorry for what I said that day, Red. I'm sorry for the way I reacted. And I know I can't change any of that, nor can I alter fate itself. But I'd really at least like to be friends with you.
A somewhat bitter smile twisted my lips. What? Go out for dinners and the like? And act like there was nothing more serious than that in our past?
Yes.
Do you really think that's wise?
Probably not. But as I said, I'm not a monk, and I need...
He paused.
I need something to hold on to outside work, something that keeps me distracted from the virus, and keeps me grounded.
I'm not your ground, Sam. I can't be.
You have to be. I can't infect you, Red. I can't kill you, not with the virus anyway.
I eyed him for a minute. The inspector told you about my burning the virus from Jackson's body, didn't she?
Yes. And that one fact gives me hope that a cure will eventually be found.
We don't even know if I actually succeeded in destroying the virus in his system.
No. But he'd be exhibiting signs by now if he were infected. And he's not.
So the inspector had said. But I wasn't going to get my hopes up. Not until the blood tests came back and we knew for sure. I scrubbed a hand across my eyes. This is madness, Sam.
Does that mean you'll consider it?
The waitress approached with our drinks and my bagels. I pushed up, grabbed some money and paid for both.
Sam said softly.
My gaze met his. I saw the desperation there, and the ever-threatening darkness that was the virus. I'd saved this man's life twice now, but it was still very much under threat. I didn't want to get involved with him because I knew it could only ever end badly. That was just the way it worked for us Phoenixes. But by the same token, I didn't want to see him hurt. Didn't want to see him lose this battle. I'll think about it, I said. And I knew, even as I walked away, that the decision was already made. I just had to hope my heart was strong enough to take the mess I was about to get us into. The end. This is Saskia Malerveld. We hope you've enjoyed this production of Ashes Reborn, a Souls of Fire novel, by Keri. Recorded Books offers a wide selection of bestsellers, mysteries, classics, histories, and more. So look for us at your public library or on download sites online. And thank you for being a Recorded Books reader.
Audible